Chapter 1033. Su Fengnian and Gao Shulu, one in a trance and the other back to reality, were talking about the heavenly secrets that no one knew except for Luo Yang. Zhong Guqing and the other masters were so helpless that they didn't have the courage to fight to the death. A woman in white was almost invincible, and now there was an out-of-body celestial being? Gao Shulu, who only had 2 talisman restrictions left on her body, looked around and took a deep breath. With an intoxicated expression, she said to Su Fengnian, whose figure was drifting, "You go back to Kunlun first, and then take a look at Donghai. Then I'll go to Beiliang." Su Fengnian smiled and nodded, but he did not immediately return from his mental journey of several thousand li. Instead, he turned the horse around for Luoyang and slowly walked on the posthouse road, gradually going further and further away, leaving Gao Shulu and a large group of copper and yellow fish bag experts behind. Su Fengnian said softly, "I know who you love, and I won't force you. If it were me and the woman I love lost her memory, she wouldn't be her anymore. Although I'm a little different, it's not that I've lost my memory, but that I've gained some. Probably in your eyes, I'm more Su Fengnian than that person. In the final analysis, you can only blame yourself for this muddled account that you've been calculating for 800 years. Back then, the alchemists of the Great Qin went out to sea to search for the elixir of immortality, and found 2 elixirs of immortality in Donghai. You thought that I was going to share them with her behind your back. Therefore, you deliberately told me that you only had one and destroyed it in front of me. But you secretly hid the other elixir in Long Pearl, so that you could obtain immortality and killed her. Actually, you're wrong." Luo Yang sneered and said, "So what if I'm wrong? Even if I could go back in time 800 years ago, I would still kill that woman, deny you immortality, and destroy your Great Qin's everlasting dream with my own hands." Su Fengnian turned his head to the carriage and said something to the old eunuch before returning to Beiliang with him. Then he turned to look into the distance and said with a smile, "You're still you." Luo Yang sat high up on the horse and let him lead the horse with a clear conscience. She did not forget to say sarcastically, "Unfortunately, she is no longer her." Su Fengnian calmly said, "Yuan Qingshan said that from now on the Yufu of Wudong will let the affairs of the human world take care of the affairs of the human world, and the people of the heavens will be free and unfettered. I think it's not bad. After my battle with Wang Xianji, there should be an end between us." Luo Yang sneered, "You want to sever the heaven and earth? Then become an ordinary person? 800 years ago, didn't you hate those mediocre mortals the most?" Su Fengnian raised his head to look at the white-clothed woman and dismissed her with a smile. Su Fengnian and Luo Yang turned a deaf ear to the heart-wrenching howls that came from behind. After walking for a while, Su Fengnian released the reins of the horse and said, "Don't forget the 3-year agreement." Luo Yang coldly snorted, "You have to defeat Gao Shulu first." Yelu Dongchuang, who was holding 2 bloody heads under his armpits, trotted over and asked curiously, "Luo Yang, that guy looks very domineering. Who is he? He looks so young, but he can enter the astral state? Could he be a Taoist master with a youthful face? An old man of the same generation as our Qilan state preceptor?" Luo Yang indifferently said, "Younger than you." Yelu Dongchuang was stunned. "Bullshit. There is no one in the world who is more talented than me in martial arts." "Luo Yang, who are you trying to fool?" Luo Yang laughed. "His name is Su Fengnian. How old do you think he is?" Yelu Dongchuang let out a strange cry and thought seriously for a moment. He smiled obsequiously. "If that's the case, then I won't go back to Bei Mang. I'll let Fatty Dong experience bad luck first. Luo Yang, I'll hang out with you for another 2 years. I haven't seen enough of Liyang's great rivers and mountains. Don't misunderstand. I'm not afraid of this new Prince Liang." Deng Mao obviously sensed that something was wrong here. He quickly met up with Luo Yang and Yelu Dongchuang and returned to Zhulu Mountain together. By the time the remaining 1,600 cavalry from Defengku arrived at the battlefield, many soldiers had dismounted from their horses and were vomiting non-stop. There were disgusting scenes of mangled flesh and blood on the posthouse road. There were few intact corpses. The commanding officer did not care about anything else. He hurriedly ordered his men to confirm the safety of the carriage. However, there was no one in the carriage. This made the commanding officer feel like he was struck by lightning. Then, dozens of white-clothed Qi cultivators with yellow jade belts arrived one after another. They looked at each other in dismay as if they had lost their parents. The commanding officer saw that these immortals in the mortal world were so terrified. He was certain that he would not be able to escape death this time. He hesitated for a moment and turned back to look at the direction of Tai and City in the north. He then turned back to look at the Guangling Road where the Old West Chu was located. His expression was uncertain. He ordered the elite cavalry under his command to return to Defenku. On the way back, he weighed the pros and cons with a few of his trusted men. He killed 2 senior commandants who were loyal to the Zhao family. The rest of the generals went to Defenku and left the military town with their families and some of their direct descendants. When Gao Shulu brought the old eunuch Zhao Saiku to Bailiang leisurely, a middle-aged scholar in green frowned on a mountain a few miles south of the courier road where the tragedy occurred. An old man beside him who had personally stirred up a pool of spring and autumn water sneered. Under this old man's control, the fate of the world flowed from the dynasty into Zhonghu. However, it could not support the number of immortals in the mortal world. Therefore, 8 to 9 latrines were already the limit. Whoever wants to poop would have to leave one. When Li Chungang left, it was because Dong Tai had ascended to the realm of Sword Immortal. When the Dragon Tree monk of the 2 Zen temples left, it was because Chen Zhibao took advantage of the loophole. Hong Shixiang was entrusted to the current chief of Wudong, Li Yufu. He would pass it on to that child in the future. This is also the most admirable aspect of Wudong. They had truly succeeded in passing down the incense from generation to generation. As for Zhao Xuansu, who exchanged one seal for another with Zhao Huangchao in the past at Mount Longhu, he could not ascend and his soul was scattered. This allowed the little girl you were protecting to have the aura of a master of all the famous swords in the world. Now that Gao Shulu has brazenly appeared, it should have been Chao Chongqing, the Confucian sage, to get lost. Chao Chongqing shook his head and said, "I have my own way to compete with Gao Shulu." Chapter 1034. The old man who had the qualifications to speak arrogantly beside Chao Zhongqing's ear was naturally Huang Sanjia. The old man thought for a moment and said, "This old man can roughly guess your plan. However, this old man can't understand why you smart people can't see through the word, love. The word, love, doesn't have many strokes and isn't difficult to write. Why is Wang Xianji able to look down on you, Chao Chongqing? Isn't it because you idiots aren't any less talented than her? You, and that Li Chungang, whom this old man truly envies, and that Mount Hui Shenyuan Jingqing, have all spent your entire lives in prison for a woman? Is it worth it?" Chao Chongqing's expression was calm. He smiled and said, "If we're talking about whether it's worth it or not, then it's not love. The word love is easy to write, but hard to let go. You, Huang Longshi, haven't encountered it yet. You laughed at us for being stupid, but we also laughed at you for being smart all your life. It's not worth it. It's good to have no attachments, but it's also not bad to have attachments." Huang Longshi gritted his teeth and said, "Once a smart person is terminally ill, then even the immortals can't cure him." Chao Chongqing turned his head and asked, "You, Huang Longshi, claim to be one of the top 3 in the world. Other than pulling up seedlings to help them grow and adding fuel to the fire, what else can you do?" Huang Longshi made a sound of surprise. "You've guessed it." Chao Chongqing smiled and said, "It's a pity that you and I don't have much time left. Otherwise, I would have a good chat with you." Huang Longshan chuckled and changed the topic. "That Gao Shulu is really ruthless. She killed more than 200 people in one go. Moreover, in this way, although the Zhao clan's vitality cannot be said to be greatly damaged, they will have a flaw that can be exploited. This will be greatly beneficial to your West Chu." Chao Chongqing shook his head and said, "The martial artists of Jianghu are trapped in the battlefield, but that's all there is to it. They have never been able to influence the outcome of a battle. Since the War of the Spring and Autumn period, the army has long been skilled in how to stop and kill masters who charge into battle alone. Of the 200 masters, only about half of them are willing to give their lives to the Zhao family and go to West Chu to fight. Throwing 100 people into the battlefield that will easily have tens of thousands of people is like trying to put out a burning cart with a cup of water. What's more, Zhulu Mountain would also be participating. With just a small group of experts, it would be hard to say who would emerge victorious. Oh, Huang Sanjia, what you really want to talk about is the desertion of the Dufengku commandant. This was a good thing. Pulling one hair would affect the whole situation. After nearly 20 years without the smell of gunpowder, the thousands of miles of territory south of the capital was filled with women. It far exceeded the imagination of the Zhao clan's son and the civil and military officials of the court. Recognizing this point, the head of the civil officials, Zhang Julu, opened his mouth to speak. Unfortunately, no one believed him. The most powerful of the military officials, Chen Jibao and Gu Jiantang, were not willing to speak nonsense. Lu Shengxiang knew that it was useless to say anything. This is where the opportunity lies. Huang Longshe also shook his head. It seemed that he was not optimistic about the final outcome of West Chu. Chao Chongqing did not mind. He laughed softly and said, "You plan to hand over the country to the crown prince of Yanqi, Zhao Zhu. Then who will you hand over Jianghu to? Could it be that woman in purple, Xianyuan Qingfeng?" The old man neither admitted nor denied. He said softly, "You said that I, Huang Longshe, can only speed up the growth of the crops and that the harvest can only be the one that has been set. You are wrong." Chao Chongqing raised his head and looked at the figure hovering in the sea of clouds on his sword. Huang Longshe smiled and said, "There is thunder, there is rain, and there are going to be countless deaths." Chao Chongqing sighed. It is impossible to exchange decades of chaos for centuries of peace. The old man put his hands together and exhaled a breath of mist. The ancients did not dare to take Mount Tai and surpass the North Sea. The future generations cannot do it. "I will do it." Chao Chongqing was silent. After a long time he said slowly, "Madman." Huang Longshe smiled freely. "I am very happy to meet you." Chao Dai, one of the top playboys in the world, suddenly asked, "Chao Chongqing has always been very curious. What is your idea of a world of peace?" The old man grunted and said vaguely, "In a world of peace and Tao, it is not a matter of the ruler and the people, but of the country and the people." The two seem to forget each other, but each has their own true temperament. Chao Chongqing closed his eyes and fell into deep thought. Huang Longshe smiled and said, "Don't think too much about it. Be careful not to fall into it and not be able to get out. At that time, even if you are the scholarly sage, Chao Qingyi, you will only be worrying about nothing. I have a stomach full of untimely and unworldly thoughts. It is enough for me to drink alone to relieve my boredom." Chao Chongqing opened his eyes and rubbed his white hair. He asked, "Can we really pass Gao Shulu and Wang Xianji?" Huang Longshe said calmly, "Actually, as long as we pass Gao Shulu, it is more or less the same. Because in the end, it is just a test. Wang Xianji is slightly better than Gao Shulu, but this is the difference in strength and not the difference in realms." Chao Chongqing said bitterly, "It is just a test, but it is no different from fighting with Wang Xianji in advance. Isn't it still a narrow escape?" Huang Longshe rolled his eyes and said, "That kid asked for it. What does it have to do with this old man?" Chao Chongqing asked with a smile, "You really didn't leave anything behind?" The old man raised his head and said firmly, "No." Chao Zhongqing's question was asked on behalf of someone, but Huang Sanjia's answer was clearly directed at the person in the sky. The young woman snorted coldly, broke through the clouds, and flew away on her sword. In a secluded mountain forest in Bailiang's Yuzhou, a thick aura like a giant python coiled around a carriage. Su Yanbing watched the python's aura gradually fade and felt relieved. Su Fengnian walked out of the carriage and said with a sigh, "Gao Shulu will arrive in Bailiang very soon. The 7th time I was in a trance, I recognized the reason for the gathering and dispersing of the world's fate. The last time I was in a trance, I remembered the talisman drawing Bet by the East Sea. This time I was in a trance in Kunlun because I was watching Dong Tai return from his visit to immortality. I was careless and bumped into Gao Shulu, so I had no choice but to show myself." Su Yanbing asked, "Do you need me to make a move?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "It's useless. I still have to settle this karma myself." For the first time, Su Yanbing showed a gloating smile and said, "I have a suggestion. Since the female bodhisattva on Mount Lantua has tied her hair, why don't we untie it one by one? This method isn't smart, but it's still a method." Su Fengnian hurriedly said, "Don't. If Luo Yang knows about this, she'll come straight from Mount Zhulu to Bailiang to make trouble with me. That woman will really kill." A laugh. A sneer. It came from the mouths of the two women at the same time, obviously with a hint of disdain. There was no need to say much about the girl who had been wandering around in the distance while carrying a withered pole. As for the other one, she was a bodhisattva. Chapter 1035. Su Fengnian glanced helplessly at the spearmaster who had probably set a trap for him. When he came back to his senses, the qi in his body was at its most turbulent and dangerous stage, and his perception of his surroundings was not very sharp. As the best fighter in Bailiang, Su Yanbing could easily find out about the arrival of the Bodhisattva from the western region. However, Su Fengnian could not. Even when he heard her sarcastic laughter, he did not feel embarrassed. He leaned against the wall of the carriage and did not deliberately stand up to greet her. Instead, he put his palms together and bowed to the six-jeweled master from Mount Lontua. Then, he waved at her, indicating for her to enter the carriage for a chat. Su Yanbing tactfully walked away. Hee, the girl squatted in the distance and drew sand on the ground with a sunflower. The Bodhisattva did not enter the carriage. Instead, she stood beside the carriage and looked at Su Fengnian with a peaceful expression. Su Fengnian, on the other hand, was somewhat emotional. At the beginning of the year, when Xiang Fan was sitting steadily in the spring and autumn fishing platform, this woman led the ghosts out of the city and he almost mistook her for the white-clothed Guanyin. At that time, he was in awe of this woman who could make the old man in the sheepskin fur coat attack. Later on, the Prince Zhao Kai went to the western regions with the silver vase. He and she were already enemies of opposing camps. After that, the situation took a turn for the worse and the two of them became a pair of adulterous lovers who flirted with each other. Bailiang secretly used his cavalry to help her get rid of dissidents and climb to the top of Mount Lontua. She, on the other hand, used esoteric monks to help Bailiang infiltrate the refugees' land. Su Fengnian looked at the Bodhisattva with a head of black hair. However, the Bodhisattva did not lack in celestial aura. Her hair was simply tied in a white hemp knot around her neck, making her look forgettable. At present, not only was Su Fengnian an ally of equal standing with her, he even had the capital to look down on her. Other than the fact that Mount Lontua was a head lower than Mount Qingliang, in terms of martial prowess alone, Su Fengnian was confident that he could pay an acceptable price and successfully kill her, even if she possessed 6 manifestations. Su Fengnian was calm and unperturbed. He smiled and asked, "Master, why did you come to Yuzhou in person?" This Bodhisattva with 6 pearls, who was like the sun in the sky in the western region, seemed to have the ability to make people feel like bathing in the spring breeze and thus feel happy. Her smile was tranquil, just like the celestial being on the mural. However, her tone was slightly alienated. She asked, "The Longxiang army was hastily expanded from 10,000 to 30,000. Can you guarantee that the western region will not be invaded by Beimang?" Su Fengnian twitched the corner of his mouth. It was said that there were 20,000 horse gangs besieging Qingcang City for more than 10 days. They could not break through the city and only left 2,000 corpses. In the end, 6,000 horse gangs slaughtered 12,000 horse gangs in 3 days. They chopped off heads until everyone changed to cold knives. In the end, only a few hundred people escaped. Finally, we know what 20,000 people are. They are just 14,000 horse gangs. Master, you may say that these horse gangs are not worth mentioning compared to the regular army. They are not organized and can only fight some contact battles with 700 or 800 people at most. They can win by bravery. If there are too many people, they will show the fatal flaw of not knowing the battle formation. However, according to Northern Liang's spy report, the 2,000 bandits who were the backbone of the 14,000 bandits were the elite cavalry of the Northern Mang Southern Dynasty. They were equipped with good horses, bows, swords, and armor. The leader of the army was a senior military officer of the Southern Dynasty. The reason why the bandits couldn't withstand a single blow was because the bandits were defeated by Huang Man or herself. Master, are you interested in guessing how many Dragon Elephant Army soldiers Huang Man had at that time? The Bodhisattva with 6 pearls was expressionless. Su Fengnian did not care. He stretched out a hand and answered his own question. Only 500. Of course, I don't deny that the Longxiang army is Bailiang's elite cavalry. These 500 are the best of the best. Master, you asked me if I can guarantee that the western region will be protected by Bailiang. The answer is obvious, yes. However, the land of refugees is the focus of Liang Mang's front line. The western region is far away from the main battlefield. Its final ownership and significance of the war is at most a secret troop. No one can be sure when it will be used. It may not even be able to determine the outcome of the war from the beginning to the end. Instead, it may become a burden to the overall situation. Moreover, the deal between you and me was a one-time deal. I support you to control the western region, and you help me to suppress the ancient military town of Fengxiang. Both sides offered a fair price. Therefore, we are both willing and happy to cooperate. Why should I put in extra effort to protect the safety of the Western region? The six-pearl bodhisattva smiled and asked, how do you achieve great freedom? Su Fengnian had a strange look on his face. Dual cultivation? Ordinary women would have long been shy, but this esoteric master still had a calm expression and nodded as if he had said a Buddhist principle. Su Fengnian waved his hand without hesitation. I wasn't joking just now. I dare to provoke anyone, but I can't provoke that woman. The six-pearl bodhisattva smiled. I can wait. Su Fengnian smiled. Up to you. The six-pearl bodhisattva walked up the carriage and sat on the other side. He said softly, the art of war emphasizes the combination of the strange and the right. When the Battle of Liangmang started, Liangzhou was the right place, the land of refugees was the strange place, and the western region was the strange place after the strange place. It is not as simple as the king of Beiliang said. If it were any other king of Liang who said that the western region was useless, I would believe it. Beiliang? Since when did Beiliang have the habit of thinking about defeat before the battle? Chapter 1036. Indeed, Su Fengnian secretly promised Chao Wei 10,000 light cavalrymen to rush to the western region. Now that his secret was exposed, no matter how thick-skinned he was, he could not help but feel a little embarrassed. After the embarrassment, he felt a little heavy. She could see that there were many masters in Beimang's southern dynasty. Would they have taken countermeasures early? Su Fengnian looked up at the sky. Although it was said that a man without foresight would have immediate worries, a man with foresight would have even more immediate worries. Now the general trend of the world, from the height of the imperial court to the distance of Jianghu, was surging with undercurrents everywhere. Su Fengnian and Beiliang were undoubtedly the ones at the forefront when the real storm surged in the future. The girl jumped onto the carriage and sat between Su Fengnian and the bodhisattva of 6 pearls. She had unknowingly caught a yellow four-legged snake in her hand. People in Beiliang called it the stone dragon. The girl held the poor little tail and kept spinning it, not tired at all. The girl suddenly stopped and hung the stone dragon in front of the bodhisattva of 6 pearls. She laughed and asked, Auntie, do you want to play? Murderous intent was everywhere. Su Yanbing, who was driving the horse, coughed softly. Su Fengnian looked down, hoping to be indifferent. The group slowly entered the hinterland of Yuzhou. Because Su Fengnian's 9 absent-mindedness came without any warning, he could only concentrate on it. As a result, he could not pay too much attention to the military and political affairs of Yuzhou, which delayed a lot of serious business. The carriage entered the city of 100 Springs, where the Yuzhou general's official residence was located. The city was famous in Beiliang for having more than 100 springs. It was said that ancestor Lu's sword qi had reached the 9 springs. Of course, Su Fengnian also had an identity certificate, but no one would associate the name on the certificate with the king of Beiliang. After entering the city, they randomly picked a restaurant in the downtown area that was prosperous even when they were not eating. Su Fengnian caught a glimpse of the eye-catching sign on the restaurant's wall. Since he became the king of Beiliang, many related stories surfaced. For a time, he became the first choice of the storytellers to earn money. Not only in Beiliang, but also in Liang and the Central Plains. As for whether it would be good or bad, it depended on the preferences of the local officials and diners. They had to cater to their liking in order to get people to give tips. The restaurant's business was surprisingly good. Su Fengnian had no choice but to pay a few more taels of silver before he managed to get a seat that was barely passable. Other than listening to the stories and enjoying the atmosphere, it was more to let Miss Hehe fill her stomach. There was still some time before the storyteller went on stage. Miss Hehe had always been wolfing down her food. Su Fengnian had been thinking about how to deal with the tyrannical forces in the territory with the Yuzhou general Huang Fujin. He did not pay much attention to the whispers around him and the covetous gazes of the 6-jewel bodhisattva. Since Miss Hehe was full, he paid the bill and left. Soon, several groups of people were fighting over the table he vacated. Su Fengnian passed through the crowd and was already near the door. Suddenly, he heard a familiar sound of a pipa. He turned around and looked carefully. He was stunned on the spot. One lantern festival, in the city of Liangzhou, there was a pair of grandfather and granddaughter. The blind old man was drinking wine and telling stories. He was talking about His Royal Highness's first trip to Jianghu. The emaciated young girl was holding a poor-quality pipa made of white wood. Later in Beimang, he saw the young girl handing out thin notes. At that time, She was playing the pipa to accompany her grandfather's storytelling. The first string was about to break. At that time, Su Fengnian was accompanied by Tao Manwu, who was a burden. In the end, he invited the old man and his granddaughter to drink wine. He even taught the young girl Chao Jiawu's pipa skills, which had almost become a peerless skill in the world. They parted ways happily. Su Fengnian also heard the blind old man talk about many things in Bailiang. He saw the knife wound on the back of the old soldier's hand. He also saw the young girl, whom the old man called Ariu, and her sincerity in treating the cheap pipa as her life. The young girl entered the stage with the pipa in her arms. However, this time, the blind old man was not with her. When she sat down, she picked up the pot of wine on the small stool in front of her and drank it all in one gulp. Su Fengnian could only hear the crazy jeers and boos from all around. They were all cursing and mocking the young girl, saying that she was a broken shoe used by a Baimang barbarian and that she had lost face for Bailiang. They said that she should have died outside the pass. What was she doing back in Yuzhou? She was a woman who only cared about money. The young girl was indifferent. She gently stroked the almost broken string of the withered pipa. A few armored soldiers who deliberately occupied the closest seats sat with their legs crossed. Every time the girl told a story or played the pipa, they would throw a string of copper coins at her. Obviously, they were already familiar with this and treated this matter as a form of entertainment. Then, everyone saw a young man walk onto the stage and squat in front of the young girl. For a moment, the copper coins fell like rain. Su Fengnian asked softly, "Ariu?" The young girl with indifferent eyes ignored him and continued to play the pipa. Su Fengnian squeezed out a smile. Word by word, he gritted his teeth and repeated what he had said in the past. As far as the whitewood pipa is concerned, the sound quality can be considered good. If the money allows, you can add a little glue. The old man said that the content of the book was especially critical of the pipa's brittleness and explosiveness. Also, the first string is not far from breaking. However, in my opinion, since you are playing the pipa for the spectators to enjoy, breaking the string is also something that everyone would be happy to see. There is no need to rush to change the first string. I'll also tell you some of the Chao family's pipa techniques. You can remember as much as you can. The young girl still did not raise her head. The sound of the pipa continued. It seemed that she did not dare to look at this man who she had met by chance in Baimang, and who had once kindly taught her the pipa. Su Fengnian squatted by her feet and said with red eyes, "I'm sorry. I forgot to tell your grandfather last time. Not only am I from Bailiang, but I am also the person your grandfather always talked about. My name is Su Fengnian. I am now the king of Bailiang." The young girl who was sitting on the small bamboo chair and only as tall as the man in front of her suddenly raised her head. Su Fengnian reached out and gently pulled her head to his shoulder. He had never said the word sorry to anyone before. Once again he choked and repeated, "I'm sorry." The first time, it was Su Fengnian who said sorry. The second time, it was Bailiang who said sorry. The young girl suppressed her sobs and said in a low voice, "It's okay." Su Fengnian stood up slowly with his back to the crowd. Su Yanbing and the six pearl bodhisattva took a step forward at the same time. Their eyes were unusually solemn. It was as if that figure had turned into Wang Xianji or the newcomer Gao Shulu. There was a tall building above the 9th floor. Only then could one call himself a worry-free celestial being. Su Yanbing shouted angrily, "Su Fengnian, do not force yourself to enter a trance for the 10th time. Go far away to Baimang." The six pearl bodhisattva put his palms together. In the sky outside the restaurant, 6 Dharma forms appeared one after another to suppress the restaurant. He said in a low voice, "All are happy." Chapter 1037. In Baimang's Dragon Waste province, there was the #1 town in the southern dynasty, Taiazwang. Following closely behind were the 3 towns of Gentleman's Pavilion, Ligu, Maolong, and Long. They formed a complete defensive line that could attack or retreat. Baimang had invested countless manpower, resources, energy, and financial resources into these military towns, but they were still crushed into a broken sieve by the combined forces of the 10,000 Longxiang army and the Great Snow Dragon cavalry. The 50 to 60,000 soldiers from the Impregnable Pass either died in battle or died in surrender. There were even some who were killed in the most tragic manner in the world. Most of the relay and fencing systems were destroyed. Most of the civil officials in the southern dynasty kept quiet out of fear, and the generals were no longer as conceited as they were in the past. The astonishing combat strength of the Baelyang cavalry created two situations, one good and one bad. The good thing was that the chess and sword music schools Hongjingyan came out of seclusion and took over all of the Ruren cavalry in the three military towns. This gave the southern dynasty, who was in a state of panic, a huge reassurance. The bad thing was that the fatty surnamed Dong could vaguely stand shoulder to shoulder with the great generals and the regional magistrate in Baymang's southern border army. His authority was equivalent. In the words of the Empress, she said, "Dong Fatty, you've been King promoted again." It was rumored that the fatty surnamed Dong pretended to be obedient after receiving the benefits. In the southern dynasty's main hall, he smiled and said to the Empress, "Sister Empress, that's right, I've finally been promoted. Actually, it would be more appropriate if all of the southern dynasty's military power was given to me." Her Majesty did not reprimand this fatty for his absurd rudeness, nor did she care about his terrible table manners. Of course, she also did not allow this extremely daring fatty to climb up the ladder. However, she still left the imperial tutor, the peace magistrate of the chess and sword music school, to support Dong Zhuo. As a result, there were very few people in the southern dynasty who could suppress Dong Zhuo. For example, the king of the southern courtyard, Huang Songpu, the two great generals Lu Gu and Yang Yuanzan, as well as the regional magistrate of the Dragon Waste province, all tactfully avoided him. Today, on the broken relay road between the tiled building and the gentleman's pavilion, a fat man wearing light armor with a standard second-rank military officer's uniform was squatting. He held a handful of gravel in his hand. The relay road under his feet was still not repaired. The two towns closer to Shijing, Ligu, and Maolong had taken advantage of the Empress's secret inspection of the southern dynasty to mobilize more than 200,000 people to repair it at an astonishing speed. This fat man was very large, but he didn't look bloated. Instead, he looked especially sturdy and majestic. This was the southern dynasty Dong Zhuo of Baelyang's southern dynasty. He was a fat man who was as famous as Baymang's Chu Lushan. He was Dong Zhuo, who was newly promoted to the 13th great general of Baymang. The fat man didn't have any bodyguards by his side. He only had a large flock of elite crows that roamed around in an extremely orderly manner. After Dong Zhuo gained power, the first thing he did wasn't to wantonly spend money to recruit soldiers and buy horses to occupy the mountains. Instead, he expanded the only crow flock in Baymang that could contend against the White Horse Scouts of Baelyang. According to the conservative estimates of some people, the original 1,000 crows had doubled in number without losing much of their combat strength. Dong Zhuo habitually talked to himself. When Dong Zhuo was still a little fatty, he was often mocked and ridiculed by others. This youth did not have any friends, and no one thought that he would have a bright future. Thus, Dong Zhuo could only talk to himself. Over time, he liked to talk to himself. After joining the army, his behavior became more and more intense. Every time a battle ended, he would go and talk to the dead. It was hard to imagine that such an unreasonable freak could rise so quickly in the imperial court of the southern dynasty. Fatty Dong was talking to himself, mumbling something about how the old man was unwilling to resign from the title of king of the south courtyard. What? He was paving the way for Hong Jingyan. "You stubborn old man, are you really unwilling to hand it over to me even if you were beaten to death? I'm not someone who holds grudges. Besides, we're not at the point where we can't live under the same sky. What are you, Huang Songpu, afraid of? Don't tell me you want to sell the chess and sword music school a big favor in exchange for a peaceful old age?" Dong Zhuo tilted his palm, allowing the gravel to slide down. He sighed. He really did miss his eldest daughter-in-law and his youngest daughter-in-law. However, his eldest daughter-in-law, who was a princess, was currently in a state of chaos. She had to go and stabilize the situation. His youngest daughter-in-law was always thinking about revenge against the new Prince Liang. She was not as cheerful and lively as before. Fortunately, he had a servant girl by his side, which made the haze in this fatty's heart dissipate. Dong Zhuo turned his head, his eyes gentle as he looked at a little girl who was leading a bright red pony in the distance. She was Tao Manwu. She was the orphan of Tao Qianji, who had become sworn brothers with Dong Zhuo after he joined the army. Dong Zhuo did not have any children for the time being, so he wanted to spoil this little girl wholeheartedly. He had even told his two daughters-in-law that even if he had children of his own in the future, he would most likely not dote on them as much. His eldest daughter-in-law had always been kind and understanding. His youngest daughter-in-law, who had entered the Dong family a little later, was so angry that she did not let him sleep in bed for half a year. Dong Zhuo looked at the pitiful Tao Manwu. The little girl, who seemed to be carved from jade, seemed to be humming a little tune. That pony was a playmate that Uncle Dong had found for her. She had always been reluctant to ride it. This time, following Uncle Dong to the south, even the young pony would be able to ride in the spacious carriage. Dong Zhuo stood up, wanting to talk to young Manwu to relieve the boredom. Suddenly, he saw the little girl suddenly turn sideways, staring blankly in a direction. The extremely sensitive Dong Zhuo narrowed his eyes and followed her line of sight. He did not see anything. This fatty was confused and could not figure out what was going on. He did not think too much about it and hurriedly ran over to the little girl. He saw young Manwu raise her arm to wipe her eyes. They were a little red and swollen. He did not know if it was because she had cried or because of the rough wind and sand. Dong Zhuo crouched down and asked gently, "What is it?" The little girl's line of sight shifted slightly, and she shook her head vigorously. Dong Zhuo had been with her day and night. How could he not know that she was lying? But what did it matter? Young Manwu did not want to talk, so Dong Zhuo did not ask. He just pressed the tip of his nose with his thumb and made a pig's head to amuse her. The little girl reached out to take Dong Zhuo's finger and helped him rub his face. She said in a serious tone, "Uncle Dong, those big brothers called Crow Palanzi all said that you have become a high-ranking official. You must not fool around anymore." Dong Zhuo laughed and said, "It does not matter. Even if one day Uncle Dong is too old to ride a horse and can't lift a spear, you will still make a face at young Manwu." Tao Manwu squeezed out a smile and glanced into the distance. She said softly, "Uncle Dong, I want to sing that song. Do you want to hear it?" Dong Zhuo laughed heartily. He carried Tao Manwu on his broad shoulders and sat her down. The little girl hummed loudly, "The green grass grows next year, the wild geese go and come back. The spring breeze blows this year. Will the young master return? The green grass is green on the green flagstones, the man in green on the green flagstone bridge, humming a Jinling tune. Whose daughter lowers her head and smiles? The yellow leaves fall this year, year after year. The autumn wind rises next year. Will the wife be there? The yellow flowers flow in the yellow river, the yellow flowers in the yellow river city, fluttering yellow butterflies. Whose son's knife is in the scabbard?" Dong Zhuo sighed in his heart. Young Manwu was probably missing the young master, who could not tell whether he was an enemy or a benefactor. Probably influenced by the little girl's song, the Crow Palanzi nearby, who were unparalleled in individual combat, began to hum a little song that belonged to the 70,000 Dong army. The Dong army's men rode their swords, mounted their spears, and died by the horse's back. Don't cry your heart out at home. My son will be the Dong army's man again. Young Manwu sat on Dong Zhuo's shoulder and looked somewhere. She hesitated for a moment, and with red eyes, she quietly waved her slender arm as a farewell. Chapter 1038. The Ruren Mountains were a vital natural barrier for Beimang's southern dynasty. With Mount Bubang as its core, it also had 3 military towns: Roxian, Laohuai, and Wuchuan. At its peak, it did not have more than 90,000 Ruren cavalry, but it was also a mighty army whose name shook the world. Last year, in the Battle of Liangmang, the Ruren cavalry did not participate because of the sudden death of Mount Bubang's 5th raccoon. The Southern Dynasty officials firmly believed that even if this powerful force faced off against Bailiang's Longxiang army, they had a 50-50 chance of victory. Mount Bubang was still Mount Bubang with the strange surname of Diwu. However, the Ruren cavalry followed the master of Gongluzi, surnamed Hong. Beimang did not place as much emphasis on birth as the Central Plains, but they revered martial prowess more. Hong Jingyan, who was originally the 4th most powerful person in the world, became the master of the Ruren Mountains without any disturbances. Gongluzi, who had suppressed Mount Bubang by himself, had never climbed the mountain to visit the surname of Diwu. He rarely even appeared near Mount Bubang. This was especially so when Diwu's daughter, the wife of Beimang's 13th general, Dong Zhuo, assumed command of the heavily weakened Mount Bubang. There were people who said that Hong Jingyan would never climb the mountain again in order to avoid suspicion. The endless Ruren Mountains were filled with wheat at the foot of the mountains. When they arrived, there was still some time before the summer wheat harvest, so the scenery was still the same. A strong wind suddenly rose, and the wheat swayed in the wind. A slender, stalwart man appeared at the edge of the wheat field without any warning. His pair of intimidating silver eyes stared fixedly at a person who was traveling far away. His hair was still grayish-white, But compared to what he had seen in Chingsong City, the grayish-black had grown longer and the white had lessened. The man who was regarded as the man who had the potential to become Baimang's martial prowess after Tuoba Bodhisattva stood in the north, blocking that fellow who had inexplicably traveled north. This was beyond Gong Luzi's expectations. In the eyes of the blind Hong Jingyan, no matter how powerful the Bailiang cavalry was, they were still limited by Bailiang's innate lack of geographical advantage. Only Baimang could go south, but there was absolutely no chance for Bailiang to go north. Therefore, Hong Jingyan had never thought that there would be a day when that person could lead troops to invade the Ruren Mountains. Whether or not they could defend the northwest gate of the Central Plains depended on Baimang's patience. When Hong Jingyan saw him, he thought of the man who used a spear and was bestowed with the surname Tu. Not long ago, when he was escorting Zhong Liang back to Baimang, the proud and arrogant Hong Jingyan had actually allowed the other party to gain the upper hand. This made Gong Luzi, who had always only cared about Wang Xianji and the Baimang god of war, Gong Luzi, whose state of mind was inevitably subtly damaged. It was so subtle that Hong Jingyan had to defeat the few masters of martial arts like Dong Tai and Deng Mao before he could recover to the peak of his former state. If it were in the past, Hong Jingyan would have tried to intercept and kill this person on the spot when he saw that this person was mentally wandering. But now, Hong Jingyan had to worry that this person was just an extremely tempting bait, and that Wang Xiao, whose real name was Lu Yambing, was waiting for the fatal blow in the dark. The young celestial being, who was mentally wandering, shuttled through the green wheat field. Wherever his mind and body went, he was not arrogant enough to get close to the murderous Gong Luzi. Standing in the wheat field 1,000 feet away, he reached out to stroke the wheat that had not yet formed ears and added fuel to the fire. He laughed and asked, after being defeated by Luo Yang and Su Yambing, "Have you, Hong Jingyan, fallen to such a miserable state? You don't even dare to make a move? With your state of mind, not to mention the invincible Wang Xianji, I'm afraid that in less than a year, even I won't be a match for you." Hong Jingyan said flatly, "What's the point of arguing?" Their voices were not loud, but they were clear to each other's ears. The young man who was mentally wandering nodded and said with a smile, "Your talent is too high. You always feel that it's only right for you to be number one in the world. Therefore, you have long set your sights on the imperial court. It can be said that you have been led astray from the beginning. In the future, there will probably be no place for you in the pugilistic world." Hong Jingyan sneered, "Su Fingyan, even if you can mentally wander and attempt to integrate the three sects, taking the opportunity to touch the threshold of being a land immortal, do you really have the right to judge me?" Su Fingyan shook his head. His eyes leaped past Hong Jingyan and looked towards the north of the Ruren Mountains. "I'll wait for you to lead the Ruren cavalry to their deaths. Now let me lead the way." Hong Jingyan's lips curled up. "You also know that you have been targeted by me. If I don't move, you won't be able to head north?" "Su Fingyan, since when did you have such self-awareness?" The young man who had one foot in the realm of heavenly phenomenon and the other in the realm of land immortal spread his hands. Two sabers, a crossing the river pond and a springtime thunder, were unsheathed from Su Fengyan's waist thousands of miles away. They were instantly grasped in his hands. It looked like Hong Jingyan's refusal to give way meant that it was just a battle. It was up to Hong Jingyan, who had already tasted defeat twice in his life, to see if he believed that he would not lose a third time. Hong Jingyan frowned before his brows relaxed. He turned his body and gestured for the young man in his line of sight to continue heading north. Bailiang was nothing in his eyes. The great king of the northern courtyard that Murong Baoding had promised was nothing in his eyes. What was a mere Su Fengyan? Su Fengyan disappeared in a flash, leaving behind a laugh. The sarcasm hammered heavily on Hong Jingyan's heart. Hong Jingyan, whose heart was as firm as a rock, was not affected by Su Fengyan's laughter. He just stood there in a daze and asked himself, "I can't take care of the world's number one and the ruler of the world at the same time?" On the square of the palace where the Taiping order of Baimang had arranged for the empress, a fleeting figure appeared out of thin air. The imperial city was shaken. The figure ascended to the sky step by step and walked to the top of the palace. He stood with his hands behind his back, as if he was looking at Taiyan's city from afar. A moment later, he disappeared. The empress, who had rushed over after hearing the news, raised her head and looked at the place where the person had been standing. She was not angry, but had a slightly sympathetic expression. She laughed softly and said, "Silly child, the general trend is irresistible. Even if Baimang can't take over the entire Central Plains, A small Baelyong is not a problem. So what if you are unrivaled in the world by luck? At most, you will become the second Chao Chongqing. The border of Yuzhou was barren and desolate. However, the more barren and desolate it was, the harder it was to work. There was no room for slacking. Otherwise, how could they dig out food from the gaps between God's teeth to survive? There was a family of 5 to 6 men of 3 generations working in the oasis. Regardless of age, they were all sweating profusely. Right now, almost all of northern Liang knew that the northern Mang army was about to invade the south. The wealthy families had already begun to move quietly, moving their valuables to either the east or the south. However, the number of wealthy people who had the ability to avoid disaster was always in the minority. Poor people like this family were still in the majority. They could only resign themselves to their fate. Wherever the fields were, they could only stay there, guarding their crops, guarding their harvest. They could only hope that the young vassal king could really help them withstand the tide of attacks from the northern Mang cavalry. In fact, the old man didn't have too many regrets. After all, he had lived a peaceful life for more than 20 years. However, he was still worried about his children. A white-haired old farmer looked at his grandson, who was working with his elders, and couldn't help but grin. This child learned from his father, and his father learned from him. Both of them had a headache just looking at the words on the books. However, the old man still felt that it was good to learn one more word for one more day. It wasn't a waste of money. The old man stroked his grandson's little head, which was reddened by the increasingly scorching sun, and asked him to take a rest in the shade. The child chuckled and trotted to the edge of the field to slack off. However, he seemed to have seen a handsome child. However, when he rubbed his eyes, the handsome child disappeared. When he rubbed his eyes again, he saw the handsome child again. This made the child confused. It was not until the man came to his side and sat on the ground that the child was sure that he had not seen a ghost during the day. The simple child plucked up his courage and asked, "Do you want some water?" The figure who gathered in the south and dispersed in the north smiled and shook his head. He looked at the figures in the field who were facing the yellow soil with their backs to the sky and asked softly, "Will the harvest be good this year?" The child was stunned and said naively, "The snow is heavy at the end of the year. It should be good." The child smiled and asked, "Did anyone in your family join the army?" The child said embarrassedly, "No. My father wanted to go before, but he wasn't chosen." As if he was afraid of being looked down upon by the child beside him, the child said with a serious face, "When I'm older, I'll definitely go. I'll kill the northern barbarians and earn a lot of money to send home. Yes, and protect our family. Also, let me tell you something. Hey, child, don't tell anyone else. Our village's May is very pretty, but she has always ignored me. When I grow up, I'll definitely marry her because her sister married a soldier at the border. I saw him once a few years ago and he was very impressive. So, I'll also go to war." The child nodded. The two of them took a break from work and looked into the distance. When the child finally came to his senses, the child beside him had already left. The child jumped up and shouted to his grandfather, "I saw an immortal." The old man smiled and straightened his back. He wiped his sweat and murmured, "This child." Chapter 1039. At first, the people in the restaurant were a little afraid of the young man with the saber. However, when he got up, he did not seem to be angry. He just foolishly held the pipa and stood beside the storyteller. Naturally, they thought of him as an embroidered pillow who wanted to save the beauty but did not have the strength to pull out his saber. Such a timid young man from a rich family was rare in Baelyong. Most of the soldiers who threw money at him had some family background. Otherwise, they would not have dared to come to the restaurant to drink, eat, and listen to storytellers while they were on duty. Moreover, they were the soldiers in charge of monitoring whether the young man broke the law. It could be said that if the young man dared to pull out his saber, they could capture him, whip him dozens of times and throw him into prison. Without 200 or 300 taels of silver, they would not be able to get him out. Yu, who was hugging the pipa, raised her head to look at the young master whose eyes were unfocused. Even though his appearance had changed, she was certain that he was him, the young master who had traveled the northern Mang and sat at the same table as her grandfather. After an unknown amount of time, the self-proclaimed northern Liang king seemed to wake up. His lifeless eyes regained their luster, and he turned his back to her. Su Fingyan said calmly to Su Yambing, who looked relieved, "Guard the door. Huang Fu, she will be here soon." The woman with her hair tied up called out 6 Dharma forms but still could not stop the celestial being from traveling. Her expression was strange, as if she had met this man for the first time. Su Yanbing wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he did not say anything. He walked to the door of the restaurant and closed his eyes to concentrate. Some customers sensed that the situation was not good and wanted to escape. However, they were knocked out before they could get close to the door. Su Fengnian slowly walked to the tables of soldiers who had stood up. His fingers pressed on a Bailiang saber that he had untied from his waist and placed on the table. The Yuzhou cavalryman who was supposed to be in charge of the young men in the city could not take the saber away. The dozen soldiers were led by a burly captain. He had good eyesight and knew that he had encountered a difficult person. However, he did not show weakness and said in a low voice, "Young master, I am Huang Yi from the Huang family of Iha County. You should think about it yourself. If you and I each take a step back today, I can still treat you as a brother. You can walk out of this restaurant and drink in Iha County. I guarantee that you won't have to spend a single copper coin." Su Fengnian said expressionlessly, "You can say this to Huang Fuxi later." The head military officer from Iha County was greatly shocked. Just as he was about to speak, he heard a rush of horse hooves coming from outside the restaurant. Listening to the horses, this was the ability that all old soldiers should have. Although this head military officer was domineering, he was not careless in his battle formation and martial arts. Even if the Yuzhou soldiers were a level lower than the border soldiers, they were still much stronger than the Lingzhou soldiers. The captain gritted his teeth and laughed coldly. "The Yuzhou general is a high official. However, my father had followed Great General Yan for many years. He is not someone that Huang Fuxi can offend." Su Yanbing allowed Huang Fuxi, who was wearing the uniform of a general without any armor, to walk into the restaurant. This was the second time he had seen the Bailiang king today. He did not say anything, prostrating himself on the ground and kowtowing. Su Fengnian raised the ordinary Bailiang blade. Ignoring the restaurant full of shocked customers, he walked in front of Huang Fuxi and asked, "I will only ask you one thing. Do you know about the restaurant?" Huang Fuxi lay on the ground and said with a trembling voice, "The official residence is only 3.5 streets away from here. I have heard about it. However, as the Yuzhou general, I only dare to manage the military affairs of a province. I do not dare to cross the border and interfere with the government affairs of a province." Su Fengnian smiled. "You are truly a competent general who abides by your duties. This king can't be worried about handing the military power of Yuzhou to you." The Yuzhou general, who was of primary 3rd rank and had power that could not be any more powerful, lay on the ground without daring to breathe loudly. Su Fengnian extended a leg and directly stepped on Huang Fuxi's head that was pressed against the cold ground. With a bang, the nearby spectators all saw blood flow out from where the Yuzhou general's face touched the ground. However, this general who had once appeared on the stage at the great reading of the gourd in early spring still did not move. Su Fengnian looked coldly at the back of Huang Fuxi's head and muttered to himself, "I have given you power. Since you do not dare to offend people, this king can do it himself." Su Fengnian suddenly extended an arm. Before Huang Yi, the commandant who did not have the time to kowtow to the king of Bailiang. His robust body was involuntarily pulled forward and he stumbled. The Bailiang blade was unsheathed and a head appeared on the ground. Su Fengnian casually pushed away the headless corpse that was falling forward. Those soldiers who knew that they had encountered the new king of Bailiang did not dare to draw their blades against him even if they were beaten to death. The status of the king of Bailiang was enough to make them not dare to move. Moreover, the king of Bailiang, who had secretly visited the capital of Yuzhou in disguise, was said to be a top expert who had personally slaughtered the 5th raccoon of Mount Bubang. Their family background was not as good as that of Huang Yi, so they did not have any life-saving talismans. Therefore, they could only kneel down and beg for mercy. Su Fengnian raised the Bailiang blade. The blade was as bright as a mirror. Although it had not yet been replaced with the 6th-generation cold blade nicknamed Great-Grandson, it was still worthy of being called the sharpest war blade in the world. As Su Fengnian's 2 fingers swiped across, the heads of those kneeling soldiers fell to the ground one by one. Including Huang Yi, who was the first to suffer, the 16 soldiers were all dead. Su Fengnian sheathed the cold blade in his hand and tossed it to Huang Fujin's side. In passing, he said, "You can continue to kneel." Then he said to Su Yanbing, "Call in Yozhou's Deputy General Lu Dian." A young and strong general quickly walked into the restaurant and knelt near Huang Fujin. He did not dare to look at the dismembered corpses on the ground, nor did he dare to look at the crowd of kneeling customers. He only heard the king of Baelyong casually say, "Everyone in the restaurant has their property confiscated. As long as they have an official position, immediately drag them out and kill them. Have someone hang these corpses on the screen wall of the general's residence in Yuzhou. Spread the word that this king is sitting in the general's residence. If anyone wants to see this king, regardless of whether they want to collect the corpses or plead for mercy, the general's residence will not stop them." Su Fengnian walked over and took Aryu's hand as they walked out of the restaurant. The woman hugged the pipa, dejected and speechless. They sat in the carriage and slowly drove toward the Yuzhou general's residence. Su Fengnian sat upright and still. He did not look at the woman and only said softly, "It's not worth it to tell stories for me. Just now, I went on an out-of-body spiritual journey because I wanted to know if it was worth it for you and your granddaughter to put in your life and the chastity of a woman, or if it was worth it to speak for Baelyong. I went to many places, but the answer was no. It wasn't until the last place where I saw a family of Baelyong commoners who knew nothing about the world and only knew how to work hard that I realized many things were not worth it. I've already let you down, so I can't let down those good commoners as well. Aryu, I don't dare to have extravagant hopes that you'll ask me for something in return to make me feel more at ease. I just want to promise you and your dead grandpa that I'll definitely defend the border to the death. As long as I'm alive, Baelyong commoners like you will have another day of peace. Just one more day is good." The woman who had suffered a bitter fate without any complaints or grievances smiled sweetly. She raised her head and looked at the side of his face. She was about to respectfully call him the king of Baelyong, but she immediately stopped. She shook her head and said softly, "Young Master Su, you don't owe us anything. My grandpa said that you're a good person, and I think so too. Aryu believes that my grandpa will not feel any regrets in the afterlife. I won't go to the general's residence. Let me get off the carriage." Su Fengnian turned to look at the young woman. Her smile was very clean, and her eyes were clear. She covered her mouth and laughed softly. "Young Master Su, have you forgotten? Aryu only knows how to tell stories for people." The carriage stopped, and the young woman jumped off. After walking for some distance, she turned around and hugged her pipa. She bent her knees slightly in the direction of the carriage and gave a salute. Hee girl, who had been jumping from roof to roof nearby, squatted down on the roof tiles. She carried the dried sunflower that was unwilling to leave her side and remained silent. The six-pearl bodhisattva waited for the young woman to leave before entering the carriage. He sat opposite the king of Baelyong. The latter clenched his fists and placed them on his knees. He said in a low voice, "Get out." The female immortal master from Mount Lontua did not get angry. Instead, she said calmly, "Freedom is a small thing, but there's still greater freedom to seek." Su Fengnian raised his head and sneered, "F***ck your greater freedom." Chapter 1040. Soon after, a series of mutiny occurred outside of Iha City. Deputy General Lu Dian led 1,000 elite soldiers to kill until his hands were limp. In the end, he could not even bear to raise his blade. It was a spear-wielding man who was extremely unfamiliar to Yuzhou who took his place. Soon after, the two captains of Yuzhou were on the verge of rebelling and had to leave their camp to demonstrate in the capital of Yuzhou. Huang Fujin's personal soldiers had no choice but to increase from 1,000 to 3,000. They continued to fight amongst themselves, and there was no suspense in the outcome. The heads of the two captains were hung on the city walls of Iha City. More than half of the Iha River nobles either knelt on the streets outside of the general's residence to force the emperor to abdicate, or fled out of the city and allied with their in-laws and nobles outside the city, using various methods to forcefully pressure that person. Without exception, all of the nobles within the city were stripped of their official positions, all of their belongings confiscated and sent to the army. It was to the point that there were even people from the personal camp of Huang Fujin and Lu Dian that had defected. At the end of the spring of the first year of Xiongfu, this great upheaval from top to bottom of Yuzhou showed no signs of subsiding. Because of the self-righteous and violent retaliation of Yuzhou's military and government, it actually attracted the 8,000 Great Snow Dragon Cavalry of Liangzhou. They penetrated deep into the heart of Yuzhou. In addition, the 3,000 personal soldiers that Wang Ji of Lingzhou had recently added were all mobilized, heading straight for the border of Yuzhou. Not to mention the Tongmen Pass captain Xianyin Ma, who had never left his seclusion, also led 6,000 elite cavalry out. Apart from this, Baelyong Protector General Chu Lushan personally mobilized troops, ordering Ningame to lead half of the Iron Stupa Heavy Cavalry and 2,000 White Feather Crossbow Cavalry to set up camp on the west side of Yuzhou, eyeing covetously like a tiger watching its prey. If one said that Huaihua Great General Zhong Hongwu was once the shadow master of more than half of Lingzhou, then Yuzhou, from the border army to the army within its borders, could be considered the personal bodyguards of Great General Yan Wenluan. Yuzhou, which was said to have 800 general families, the vast majority could be considered the disciples and grand disciples of this old general. Their increasingly fierce resistance finally made an old man overseeing the border unable to sit still. However, he did not muster a large force to lead troops south. Instead, he traveled lightly and noiselessly to Iha city of Yuzhou. The carriage stopped outside the city. The old man, who was blind in one eye, walked alone into the city. Walking on the streets brimming with killing intent, the old man walked all the way to the residence of the general reeking of blood. The old man originally thought that the young madman would arrogantly refuse to meet him, or even cleanly capture him, the commander of the Bailiang infantry army, or at the very least, hang him out in the cold for several days and nights before letting him in. However, the old man guessed wrong. The young man was sitting alone on the steps outside the residence, as if he had been waiting for him all this time. After Ren Tu's death, the old general, whose prestige in the Bailiang army was unparalleled, questioned Su Fingyan. Why? Su Fingyan folded his hands in his sleeves, not looking at Yan Wenluan, who had wanted Su Shao to ascend to the throne. Gazing at the end of the street, he calmly said, "In the past, I heard a saying that Lingzhou's surname is Zhong, Yozhou's surname is Yan, and only Liangzhou's surname is Su." Su Shao never took it to heart. "I know this. You, Yan Wenluan, know this, but Zhong Hongwu might not know this. This is because when Zhong Hongwu heard that the court not only intended to cultivate his son, Zhong Qingxin, but also made him a great general, and that as long as West Chu rose up in rebellion, Zhao Shi promised him that he could lead troops for the Duke of Huainan, Zhao Ying, to take a share of the spoils, so he began to fan the flames in Yuzhou, wanting to drag you down with him so that he could take advantage of the chaos to escape from Bailiang. These days, I had the Falcons keep an eye on you, but you never made a move. In the end, you only entered Iha city alone." The old general angrily said, "Even the great general can live his life without rebelling against Liang, so naturally, I will live my life without rebelling against Bailiang. What kind of dog is that Zhong Hongwu? How can he be mentioned in the same breath as me? You, Su Fengnian, are so impatient that you want me, Yan Wenluan, to pack up and scram from the border so that your trusted aide can occupy my position. Do you really think that Yan Wenluan is hogging the position of infantry commander and not retreating because he is greedy for power? Do you, Su Fengnian, really think that this position is something that anyone can sit on? That anyone can sit on it steadily? If not for the fact that I respect you, Su Fengnian, for having the guts to not accept that bullshit imperial edict and finally doing something that did not disgrace the great general, I would have already led 100,000 troops to the south. At that time, the cavalry and infantry would be divided. What kind of king of Bailiang are you? What will you use to resist the restless Baimang iron cavalry?" Su Fengnian smiled. "I know that the old general will not do that." The old general was so angry he almost wanted to act and slap this cunning brat to death. Su Fengnian patted the steps beside him and indicated for the old general to sit down and chat. Yan Wenluan snorted coldly. Su Fengnian did not insist and continued, "My master and Bai Yan have fought for the latter half of their lives. Does the old general know what my master admires the most about Zhang Julu?" When Li Yishan was mentioned, Yan Wenluan's emotions calmed slightly. In the entire world, Li Yishan was the most worthy of Bailiang. While Yan Wenluan was the backbone of Yang Kai Zhao Chongling's faction, she did not show any disrespect to Li Yishan who did not work together due to their different paths. Su Fengnian said softly, "It is not that Zhang Julu made the Zhao family prosper as old general imagined. It is not that he held the power of the court alone, but before he rose to power, he moved his parents and family to Great Peace City. He did not give anyone a chance to criticize Zhang Julu. Because this Grand Secretary knew back then that as long as he became the head of the officials in the world, no matter how clean he was, he still had his family, relatives and children. Once the two sides were thousands of miles apart, there would be people who would use his name to do whatever they wanted. Even if everyone in the court could only criticize silently and not accuse him, the spirit that supported Zhang Julu's rule of the world would weaken. So this is what my master admires the most about Zhang Julu. Looking back at our Bailiang Su Shao, my master did not expect all of you to have the breadth of mind and vision of Zhang Julu. Before Su Xiao died, he was still worried and told me to have a tolerant heart, to tolerate other people making mistakes. In the past I did this. In the Lingzhou officialdom, I endured and did not kill anyone, not one. Yan Wenluan's expression was still gloomy, but it was a bit better than before. Su Fengnian continued, minding his own business. But I realized that Su Xiao was not wrong, but he was not completely right. The Bailiang under our feet belongs to the Su family in name, but in the end, it belongs to the people of Bailiang. I, Su Fengnian, actually do not mind how you disregard the law and discipline. As long as you fight for my Su family on the battlefield, it is enough. I can be the king of Bailiang with a clear conscience. Who knows, I might even be able to leave my name in the annals of history. Not to mention the official history. Perhaps there will be a few good words in unofficial history. Everyone says that since I put my head on my belt to conquer the world, then I deserve to rule the world. I, Su Fengnian, did not say that you should not enjoy life. But enjoying life is not wrong, right? Cherishing life is not a bad thing, right? Old General, why don't you and I just treat it as speaking with conscience to Su Xiao? Yuzhou, Lingzhou, and Liangzhou, how many of these generals treat the common people as human beings? I did not stay behind closed doors at Mount Qingliang and make sarcastic remarks. Instead, I personally walked around Yuzhou and only then did I walk step by step to Iha City. In truth, I would like to say to all the officials of the Northern Liang Path, whether you relied on your own abilities to become an official, or relied on your parents' contributions to become an official. If you want to enjoy life, then go ahead and enjoy it. Don't harm others too much. However, these words cannot be made known to the public. Moreover, even if I said these words to Zheng Honggu with all my sincerity, he would only think that it was an unfunny joke. What could I do? He sought his own death, so I could only let him die. Oh, that's right. The one who reported Zheng Honggu was none other than the county chief of Longqing County, his son, Zhong Qingxin. Yan Wenluan's expression was uncertain. Su Fengnian gazed into the distance and bit his lip. Not being able to manage Yuzhou well is Huang Fuxi's fault, as well as your fault, old general. Of course, if we are unable to defend Bailiang in the future, in the end, it is still my fault. The old man hesitated for a moment, then walked up the steps and sat down a few steps below Su Fengnian's feet. Su Fengnian suddenly smiled and said, I heard Su Xiao say that back then, old general dreamed of riding a horse, just like how you entered the imperial city of Northern Han, swaggering into the imperial palace of Great Peace City. The old man with his back to the king of Bailiang cracked his lips into a soundless smile. Su Fengnian said softly, Old general, you can forget about this. However, a few days ago, I entered an out-of-body state and traveled to the imperial palace of Beimang. That place is not much inferior to Great Peace City. Old general, why don't you take a step back and settle for the next best thing? Let's strive to ride a horse there and raise the whip? Yan Wenluan turned his head and asked, Truly? Su Fengnian replied with a smile, I only have this thought. As for whether or not I have the ability, old general, do you truly believe that I can do it alone? Yan Wenluan stared blankly for a moment. He lowered his head and cursed, Motherfucker! He's just like the great general when he was young. Back then, he lied to me and said that as long as I followed him, I would be able to ride a horse until my butt was polished clean. This old man really foolishly took the bait. Yan Wenluan paused for a long time and then raised his head to look at the sky. He murmured, But the great general did not lie to me, did he? The old man retracted his gaze and suddenly stood up. He said gravely, If that day really comes, even if I, Yan Wenluan, am too old to ride a warhorse, I hope that the king of Bailiang can have someone carry me there. If I am already dead, since the king of Bailiang has agreed to carry the coffin for that old soldier of the fish drum camp, Xu Yongguan, then you would not mind carrying the coffin for Yan Wenluan once, right? Su Fengnian also stood up and said calmly, Su Fengnian thanks old General Yan. The old man walked down the steps and turned around to face Su Fengnian. He raised his hands and shouted, Cavalry of the fish drum camp, Yan Wenluan, Xu Yongguan, and his comrade, greet the king of Bailiang. The old man then turned and left. He left the Yi River, Yuzhou, and headed for the border. Su Fengnian sat back down on the steps and rubbed his cheeks. Su Yanbing, who was beside him, said emotionally, At the Battle of the Western Wall, the fish drum camp only had 16 men left. Even I did not know that Yan Wenluan was one of them. Su Fengnian nodded and said, Su Xiao did not mention it. Su Yambing said. Bei Meng, why don't you count me in? Su Fengnian laughed and said, it is not like we are snatching a wife. What is there to snatch? Su Yambing dismissed it with a laugh. He sat down near the king of Bailiang. His eyes were firm as he said slowly, don't worry. With you here, Bailiang will have more than 300,000 cavalry. The two of them were silent for a long time. He, the girl had unknowingly sat behind Su Fengnian, and for some reason, the stalk of the sunflower that had been following him like a shadow had disappeared. She rested her chin on her hands and quietly watched his back. Bailiang has millions of households. How many of them are wrapped in iron clothes and withered bones? Su Yanbing began to clap his knees and sing. He was full of passion. Which young man did not envy the green-robed man who walked the Jianghu with a sword? Which young man did not want to fight for fame in the yellow sands? Good man, do not say that the heroes of the world have fallen into your trap. Little lady, don't hide your feelings of adoration deep in your stomach. Come, let's see who is beating the beauty drum. Come, let's see who is the butcher of the Yang realm. Come, let's see who will fight for the throne with me. Hashtag fight for the throne. Chapter 1041. 3 chapters. 17,000 words. The next chapter will be around noon. The spring rain in Great Peace City had just stopped, and the entire capital seemed to have become much cleaner. No matter how noisy the court was, that was the business of the officials. The common people had to eat and sleep, and most of them had to obediently live their days of waking up early and sleeping late. However, there were some who had nothing to do. However, these people who had been belittled as playboys were also divided into 3, 6, and 9 classes. Those who had the ability to play with courtesans were the first class. Those who played with famous horses and antiques were the second class. Those who were slightly worse off would go play with handmade walnuts. At the very least, they would get a few fish and insects to keep up appearances. However, there was a young man who lived in a shabby alley in the southwest corner of the capital. He was completely out of class. However, since he lived in an alley where the common people lived, it would be strange if he could play with good things. If he wasn't reincarnated well, then he had to accept his fate, right? This young man was like the other common people in the capital with the surname Zhang. He had been given one of the most famous surnames in Liang, but he couldn't have any great prospects. He didn't do any proper business all day. Other than borrowing money and drinking with women, he only knew how to wander around aimlessly with a pigeon whistle. He couldn't even afford to raise a decent pigeon. If this was in Great Peace City, it would be called that you had to pay attention to the poor even if your face was swollen. Even the poor people who didn't pay attention to anything were disdainful. Zhang Bianguan was this kind of prodigal that everyone looked down on. In the eyes of the neighbors, this guy was lucky that he had accumulated some good fortune in an unknown lifetime to be able to marry a beautiful wife. Zhang Bianguan never knew how to be content. He still refused to stay at home and roll in the sheets with his wife. He only knew how to run outside every day, leaving early and returning late, going out empty-handed and returning home empty-handed. As time went on, even the kind-hearted old neighbors gradually became too lazy to pay attention to him. Not long ago, Zhang Bianguan seemed to have been beaten by someone. His nose was badly bruised and his face was swollen. It had only gone down in the past few days, but he was still laughing and joking around. He greeted everyone he met with a smile, calling uncle and aunt attentively, not caring if other people paid attention to him or not. As the weather got hotter and hotter, Zhang Bianguan wore cooler and cooler clothes. The time Zhang Bianguan spent away from home also grew longer and longer. After all, the capital was so big, how could there be a lack of young women on the streets? As dusk approached, Zhang Bianguan wandered back to Squinta Street not far away. He heard the sudden and melodious chirping of pigeons above his head. He habitually raised his head and smiled. There was an old pigeon bell wrapped in green silk on his wrist. He had been playing with it all year round. He just stared blankly at the sky with narrowed eyes. For so many years, he had been ridiculed as someone who couldn't even eat leftovers and step on dog shit. No one knew what he was thinking. Anyway, no one was interested. Those who had a general understanding of his temperament only knew that this useless coward probably still wanted to play, but he didn't dare to accompany the rich to play in those high-class snowy places. In the end, he could only look at those dead things that didn't cost money. The colorful attics, the gray and unknown alleys, the Chongwu gate that brought soldiers, the Chaoyang Gate that brought grain, the Dingshan Gate that brought wine, and the stone Qilin that squatted on the drum tower for a few years after Li Yong established the dynasty. The chirping of the pigeons drifting in the sky began and ended. Zhang Bianguan reluctantly withdrew his gaze, feeling that it was still early and not yet time to go home. After thinking for a while, he ran to the side of the Locked Dragon Well on Squinting Street and squatted beside it. This ancient well had been dry for a long time. Beside the well, there was a judge made of yellow mud bricks. According to the rumors in the marketplace, Li Yong suppressed the water in the world with fire. This clay statue was as tall as a person, sitting with its chest and stomach exposed, and laughing with its mouth open. Every mid-autumn, the common people would add firewood to the fire, and flames and smoke would rush out from the mouth and nose of the clay judge. Zhang Bianguan squatted beside the well as usual at the foot of the clay statue, occasionally raising his sleeve to wipe the corner of his mouth. A few days ago, he was beaten up quite badly by a group of people. They probably mistakenly thought that Zhang Bianguan's father was about to lose his power, and that it was time to teach this bastard a lesson that disgraced the aristocratic families of the capital a lesson. However, after satisfying his craving with punches and kicks, he discovered that the weather in the Liyang imperial court was still the same. This brat's father was even more ruthless for the first time, beating up a large group of people until they cried for their parents. As a result, the people who relied on these groups of people to eat and drink immediately hid. They didn't even have the guts to apologize to Zhang Bianguan. Later, they trembled in fear for a good half of the day, and didn't even wait for the slightest bit of revenge. Only then did they all let out a collective sigh of relief. They gathered together and increasingly mocked this person surnamed Zhang for being a big piece of trash. He had a father that they couldn't even pray for even if they burned incense and prayed to Buddha. He didn't know how to use the tiger's skin to enjoy his life. He deserved to be treated like a pile of rotten dog shit that even stepping on would dirty his shoes. Zhang Bianguan's only strong point was that his mind wandered thousands of miles away. When he suddenly discovered that there was an elegant young man beside him, he glanced at him and didn't say anything. After waiting for a long time, he finally smiled and asked, "You really didn't come to beat me to vent your anger?" The scholar-like scholar smiled and shook his head. "How would I dare to beat up the son of the Grand Secretary? Besides, if we really fought, I wouldn't be your match. Why would I bring shame to myself? Even if you didn't fight back and let me beat and scold you, I would still be treated as an amusing fool by you." Zhang Bianguan made a sound of surprise. "So you're actually a sensible person? You're not from the capital, are you? With your eyesight, if you're from the capital, you wouldn't even come to see me." The scholar asked, "You admit that you're a smart person?" Zhang Bianguan sneered and said self-deprecatingly, "I'm considered a smart person? Then what would my father be?" The scholar nodded and said, "That's right." Zhang Bianguan lay on the mouth of the well and gazed at the dark and bottomless mouth of the well. He no longer paid attention to this unknown scholar who was boring once he understood things. The scholar leaned against the mouth of the well and said faintly, "I know you like to see the scheming in the palaces and pavilions because they only complement each other. Compared to the harm between people, they are much more amiable and lovable. I also know that when you left the Zhongfu to set up your own household, you planted a peach tree at home. The people of Great Peace City all like to have trees in their yards. Pomegranates that give birth to many children, jujube trees that give birth early, persimmon trees are also common. But there are no peach trees because the character for peach sounds like escape and is inauspicious. Great Peace City is the root of Liyang. If the tree is moved, it will die. Where can the people of Liyang escape to without Great Peace City? You, Zhang Bianguan, are not stupid. You planted it for your father, but your father, the Grand Secretary of Liyang, ignored it. He did not escape, so you, as his son, can only continue to stay in Great Peace City and wait for death. Hopefully in the future, you can at least send him off. It would be even better if you could drink at the Qingming festival." Zhang Bianguan calmly made an O sound and continued to look at the mouth of the well. The scholar smiled slightly and said, "You must have guessed that I am that Sun Yin who came from Bailiang to ask Tantanon for an official position." Zhang Bianguan turned his head. "Sun Yin, is it? Then tell me, what exactly is that stone Qilin on the drum tower silently watching the world for hundreds of years waiting for?" Sun Yin had already quietly entered the secretariat and successfully attached himself to the towering tree that was Tantanon. Although he was just a small official, since he had entered Master Huan's discerning eye, wasn't his meteoric rise just around the corner? The few people who understood this point long ago, but the vast majority of muddle-headed people would not remain muddle-headed. Sun Een met the blue-eyed young son's gaze and shook his head. How would I know what a stone Qilin is waiting for? In any case, it's not waiting for the wind to blow and the smoke of war. In the end, the people are in a terrible situation. If it's only exchanged for people wearing dragon robes, is it fun? Zhang Bianguan laughed and stroked his stubbled chin. It's not fun. Zhang Bianguan sat shoulder to shoulder with Sun Een. He stretched his neck, exhaled, and then inhaled again. Only then did he chuckle and raise his wrist to show Sun Een the simple and unadorned pigeon bell. He said, "In the past, I received a pigeon as a gift from someone. It's a first-class item, black with a hint of purple. Compared to the king of Bailiang, Su Fengyan's falcon, the price is not much different. At the time, my father had not yet become the Grand Secretary, only a third-rank official. My father came to find me, but he didn't scold me. You should know what kind of person my father is. Scolding others would be flattering you. Other than Master Huan, he has almost never scolded anyone in his life. He asked me, 'This pigeon is my father's current net worth. What kind of thing are you, Zhang Bianguan, to be worth this price? Are you stupid, or are you really stupid?' That year I was 14 years old. In a fit of anger, I returned the pigeon to someone. That person in front of me said with a smile that he didn't have the habit of taking back gifts. Afterwards, he used his hand to strangle the pigeon to death. He was the current crown prince, His Highness, Zhao Zhuan. From that day onwards, I swore that I would never mix with these people again. I would rather listen to the creaking sounds of small doors opening than listen to them flattering each other. I would rather look at those dead objects that no one cares about than look at those children of influential families whose farts can be sold as gold and silver. Over time, no one liked to take me out to play. I was also happy to be alone in peace." When his father, Zhang Julu, was mentioned, Zhang Bianguan couldn't help but sink into contemplation. Chapter 1042. He still remembered that after his father had distinguished himself in the Hanlin Academy, his grandparents had moved from their old home to the city. During the hot summer months, the two elders especially liked to lie on the rattan chairs under the shade of the trees and help their grandchildren fan themselves. Fan after fan, summer after summer. As they fanned, only his grandmother was left. After that they were all gone. Their father also did not observe filial piety. The court was even more impatient than the civil official who was his son. They directly issued an edict to revive him. Their group of children did not find anything strange from their father's face. Zhang Bianguan clearly remembered that at that time, in Taiyan City, the streets were filled with rumors. Everyone said that their father did not care about being a person in order to become an official. However, as their father's official hat grew bigger and bigger, the voices became quieter and quieter until no one mentioned it anymore. He, Zhang Bianguan, had not done anything for many years. Compared to his eldest brother and second brother, he had left home later. However, he saw the family matters more clearly than his two brothers. Since when did the Zhang family's family matters become the same as the matters of Jing and the world? Zhang Bianguan's expression was lonely. The back of his head rested on the mouth of the well as he looked up at the dusky sky. When he was young, there was a lion bridge not far from the Fu. Once, when the family went out to play, their father had them count how many stone lions there were on the bridge. Eldest brother was the most like their father. He was serious in everything he did and counted in a methodical manner. Second brother was a bookworm. From young, he did whatever eldest brother told him to do. Whatever eldest brother did, he would learn. He, Zhang Bianguan, was only 2 years older than his sister, Zhang Bianguan, so the siblings were the closest. Taking advantage of the time when their parents returned home, he took his sister to the frozen river under the bridge to play. When they were tired and saw that his eldest brother and second brother were still there foolishly counting, Zhang Bianguan ran directly to the omniscient Uncle Huan to ask for an answer. In the end, his eldest brother and second brother returned in the middle of the night and saw their younger brother kneeling on the ground. Since then, Zhang Bianguan, who had suffered a lot, knew that those petty tricks were not real intelligence. However, after that, his mother secretly brought him a bowl of hot rice. When his father bumped into him, he didn't get angry. He just patted his head and said something that he only understood many years later. "You are much smarter than your two elder brothers. But since you have the same surname as your father, it's not a good thing." Zhang Bianguan sniffled and covered his face with his sleeve. Sun Yin was about to speak when he heard a series of undisguised footsteps, so he shut his mouth. He saw a tall woman with a sword walking over slowly. Hearing the familiar footsteps, Zhang Bianguan hurriedly wiped his face in a daze. He smiled brightly and said, "What a rare guest. Heroine Zhang, why don't you be kind and give me some money?" Zhang Gaoxia glared at him and said, "Jiang Hu pays particular attention to saving the needy and not the poor. Do you think I would give a bag of silver to a pauper like you? I'll take your surname." Zhang Bianguan rolled his eyes and said, "The two of us have the same surname." The corner of Zhang Gaoxia's mouth curled up and she said, "That's why." Then she threw a heavy bag of silver. Zhang Bianguan was not surprised. He caught the silver and laughed heartily. This heroine really has a bodhisattva's heart. In the future, you will definitely find a handsome and talented man who can overturn the world and love his wife dearly. Before that, let's discuss something. Heroine, why don't you take me in and drag me home? Just take care of my meals. It would be best if there's meat and wine. Zhang Gaoxia didn't bother to banter with her third brother. Instead, she coldly glanced at Sun Yin, a minor official from the secretariat who she knew very well. Sun Yin stood up alone, leaving Zhang Bianguan to sit alone. He turned his gaze toward the Grand Secretary's beloved daughter, Zhang Gaoxia, ignoring her cold gaze that could slice a person's soul. He asked, "Miss Zhang, I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it or not." Zhang Gaoxia coldly said, "Then shut up." Zhang Bianguan slowly stood up and threw the bag of silver. He had a look of schadenfreude as he destroyed the bridge after crossing the river. "Sun Yin, oh Sun Yin, Chancellor Yao said that you were a great scholar who won 3 prizes in a row. It's a pity that my sister has never liked scholars who play with words. Don't expect her to look at you differently. If you really want to talk about principles, then it's your business if you're strong, and it's my business if I like you. However, if you really don't change your mind and want to marry my sister, I don't care. But you have to beat her first, and she has to like you. Then, you have to be the son-in-law that my father personally approves of. Where can you find such a rare and handsome young man? You're the one who delivered yourself to my door, so you definitely don't count." Sun Yin said helplessly, "Why would I like a girl who already has someone in her heart?" Zhang Gaoxia laughed coldly and said, "Sun Yin, you know quite a lot." Sun Yin didn't mind and said calmly, "In any case, I'm destined to only speak half a sentence with the Grand Secretary in this life. Being able to speak with the Grand Secretary's son is enough to make up for my regret. As for you, heroine Zhang Gaoxia, it's just a pleasant surprise. Don't worry, I also like the person you like. I won't fight with you over her." Zhang Gaoxia laughed mockingly and said, "You like men?" Sun Yin smiled and said, "Like is like, but it's not like a woman who likes a man. Admiring a person from the bottom of my heart can also be considered like. To give an example, it's just like how I really like that Grand Secretary Darren was not able to write an excellent poem like setting up thousands upon thousands of buildings, greatly protecting the cold under the heavens, but he was able to accomplish this magnificent feat with his feet on the ground. 6 yamens, a total of 4,000 houses. In the future, there will be fewer and fewer children of the rich and powerful families, and more children of the poor and common people. This is no different from Senior Li Chungang opening the gates of heaven with his sword in Jianghu, opening the mountains for the younger generation." Chapter 1043. Sun Yin turned to leave, saying leisurely, "Of course, you think that what others like, you give them, as if this is giving, but you never ask if the other party wants it or is willing to accept it. This kind of person, no matter how sincere he is just a kind of self-righteousness. He thinks that he is magnanimous and has a clear conscience, but in reality, he is still selfish. Whether you are talking about love between a man and a woman, or about the relationship between brothers, all can be tricked. Because it is not easy to be good to others, but it is not too difficult. But to really put yourself in their shoes and respect them, that is very difficult. The ancients used the term bosom friend to describe close friends. So what counts as a bosom friend is a great study. Sun Yin is a stupid person. He does not know what kind of world the next 1,000 years will be, but the world we live in can be considered to have seen through. There are many muddle-headed people, but there are still some who do not care about benefits, reputation, good swords, posthumous titles, the good intentions of friends, the worthy deaths, the legacy of a family, or even the country of one person." Zhang Gaoxia frowned, asking, "What nonsense is this guy spouting?" Is he cursing our father for fulfilling the two words loyalty and righteousness, but only letting down Uncle Juan? But he seems to be praising him at the end. Isn't this self-contradictory? Zhang Bianguan said carelessly, I'm afraid he is also confused. People are too smart, they like to go against themselves, tossing and turning, empty-handed. Zhang Gaoxia glared. Sun Yin, what nonsense are you talking about? I don't know, but you are cursing our father. I can still hear it. Zhang Bianguan took off the pigeon bell and casually tossed it into the dragon ceiling well. He made a cynical face and laughed. Father is too lazy to scold me, so I will secretly scold him. You won't tell on me, so what am I afraid of? Zhang Gaoxia's tone became heavy. He asked, You are really not going to follow your father's wishes and go to Liaodong to join the army? Zhang Bianguan shook his head gently. As a son, since I can't help much, I have to send my father off. Giving birth to a child is nothing more than taking care of him when he dies. As a son, I have to do my best to do one of them. Zhang Gaoxia sat on the mouth of the well. Zhang Bianguan said with a look of surprise, I'm telling you this kind of thing. Why don't you cry? Zhang Gaoxia said calmly, I'm not that kind of woman. Zhang Bianguan nodded. Actually, we're not as much like our father as you are. Zhang Bianguan seemed to remember something and said, You are about to leave the capital and travel the Jianghu. Listen to me. Although Dad says he doesn't want you to go anywhere, he actually wants you to go to the place in his heart. Zhang Gaoxia lowered his head. Don't say any more. If you continue, I'll really cry. Zhang Bianguan slapped his cheeks with both hands. Mother asterisk Kerr, a woman like you hasn't even cried, and your brother, a man, has already given in. There was a person who said something that was absolutely true. I have never heard anything more reasonable than this sentence in my life. Even Sage Zhang would have to admit defeat if he heard it. Zhang Gaoxia raised his head. Zhang Bianguan blinked. He said that if a man bleeds but doesn't cry, what kind of hero is he? Every woman in the world bleeds but doesn't cry. Zhang Gaoxia took a deep breath and then another. Only then did he calm down his murderous mood. Zhang Bianguan said softly, Go ahead. The world is in chaos. When the time comes, there will definitely be a scene of heroes, ambitious and ruthless. Don't miss it. Just treat it as giving our father a few more glances. Zhang Gaoxia did not agree or refuse. But on this day, he did not see heroine Zhang with her sword again in Great Peace City. Zhang Bianguan was no different from usual. He walked back to Slanted Eye Street in the darkness. The dim yellow light in the courtyard was waiting for him to come home. That stupid wife, who was not very beautiful, was angry at him for drinking with women, but still waited like this. Day after day, she probably felt that there was no hope for her life, much less an end. 4 other women, not to mention marrying into the Zhang family, which was the only family in the entire Liang dynasty. Even if they were married into a 3rd or 4th rank official's family, they would still have a glorious life. Not only would they be able to live a life of luxury, their children would also not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives. When they grew up, they would be able to live a life of luxury. If they wanted to help the country and the world, they would help the country and the world, and if they wanted to be mediocre, they would be mediocre. Zhang Bianguan was about to open the courtyard door like usual and yell for his wife to serve him good wine and meat when he suddenly squatted down for no reason. Then he heard the footsteps of passers-by. He hurriedly stood up and pushed open the door to go home. The woman, as usual, was silent. She served the warm and suitable food and ate it with her chopsticks. Occasionally, she glanced at the man, who had one leg on the bench and only cared about himself and was never willing to say a word to her. That man was her husband. But he had never seen her show any hidden bitterness or grievance on her delicate face. Zhang Bianguan always liked to say that the reason why she was so good-tempered was that she was afraid of his family background. A starving camel was still bigger than a horse. No matter how useless Zhang Bianguan was, he was still Zhang Julu's son. How could she not serve him carefully? But every time he said this, Zhang Bianguan would slap himself in the mouth and say that only flowers, birds, fish, and insects needed to be served. Then she would secretly laugh until Zhang Bianguan stared at her. Then she would turn her head, but the faint smile on the corner of her mouth didn't fade. That night, after she fell asleep, Zhang Bianguan began to sob quietly. I'm afraid that I like you, but I'm even more afraid that you'll like me. That's why I'm like this. How could I not want an obedient and sensible child? My son and daughter are both very good. But I'm Zhang Julu's son. The more I do, the more mistakes I make. If I tell you the truth, will you run away? But where can you run away to? If you don't run away, can you live more easily than now? No matter how stupid you are, you'll come to realize it when you die with me. But I'd rather you hate me at that time. I just want you to muddle-headedly complain that I'm a failure, a good-for-nothing, and that I'm not in charge of the family. Wife, in this life I owe you. If there's a next life, I'll definitely repay you. Zhang Bianguan's face was full of tears. After wiping them clean, he gradually fell asleep. That gentle woman who slept with her back to him and didn't move at all through the night slowly opened her eyes when she heard her husband snoring. Her gaze was still gentle. Just like the day she walked off the sedan and when he lifted the red veil. In the morning of the second day, Zhang Bianguan mindlessly ate breakfast and strode out of the house. After Zhang Bianguan left the house, he walked on Slanted Street and looked towards the northwest. He said softly, "Gao Xia, you have to go to Beiliang. Only there will be chaos for a while, and not for a lifetime." Today, the youngest son of the Grand Secretary was still that great peace city, or even the world's most mocked noble family. But that woman? The woman quietly did one small household chores after another. When she had nothing to do, she would sit on the threshold of the inner courtyard and look towards the gate, waiting for him to come home. Chapter 1044. Last year, His Royal Highness, who was also the General of Lingzhou, stirred things up in the officialdom of Lingzhou. In the end, it was just a farce without much noise or rain. However, under the bloody iron fist of the new Prince Liang, Yozhou's military and politics was a tragedy that caused everyone to be in danger. Spring rain was as precious as oil, and the rain on Beiliang's spring tail was even more so. When the rain fell, the blood would wash away, saving a lot of trouble for the Yamen of Yuzhou. It should be known that this was an unprecedented change in Beiliang. 3 lieutenants had died, and the number of commandants with real power could not be counted with 2 hands. There were no less than 100 high-ranking officials and dignitaries who had been stripped of their official titles and sent to the border. Although the so-called 800 general families in Yuzhou were definitely an exaggerated number, there were at least 300 families. In the end, most of them were affected. The families involved in the tragedy had no power to fight back. As for those who had been patiently waiting for General Yan Wenluan to be furious, they were even more disappointed. Not only did the general stand by and do nothing, he even personally mobilized the elite infantry of the Yan family in the 6 camps to control the passes in the northern part of Yuzhou. This was not only turning his back on them, but also stabbing himself with a knife. The Great Snow Dragon Cavalry had infiltrated the hinterland of Yuzhou. In the east of Liangzhou, Qi Danghua, the foster son of the old Prince Liang, had personally taken action. In the north of Lingzhou, Wang Ji and Xianin Ma, 2 cavalry troops that belonged to different orders of Beiliang, trained their soldiers and horses. The deputy commander of the infantry, Ancestor Gu, was a new noble in Beiliang, as well as Lu Yuanji, Wei Taizhan, and the other veteran generals who had retired regardless of whether they were related to Yuzhou or not. They still did not hesitate to publicly support the new Prince Liang at the same time. At this time, even if the Yuzhou generals did not understand why the new Prince Liang was so good-tempered in Lingzhou and did not care about old friendships in Yuzhou, they all painfully understood one thing. Beiliang's surname was Su. In Beiliang, none of the old generals who had the ability and qualifications to compete with the young Prince Liang were willing to speak up for them. In short, it was too late. The old people were gone, and the new people were coming. Moreover, several groups of people came. Some were called by Su Fengnian, and some came uninvited. The latter was not polite at all. Huang Shang, who had vaguely become the leader of the scholars in Beiliang, almost jumped up and scolded them. Mr. Wang from Shangyin Academy leisurely persuaded Huang Shang that anger would harm his liver. The 2 elegant old men had just enjoyed the desert scenery from the border and hurried to Yi River in Yuzhou without stopping. However, the closer they got to Yi River, the more calm Mr. Wang became. Normally, the scholar Huang Shang, who should be the most happy to see this scene, became the guy who scolded the king of Beiliang the most fiercely. He scolded Su Fengnian for being too vicious and said that he was the real butcher, who was more ruthless than Su Shao. If he had the ability, he should go to Beimang to kill people. What kind of ability was it to kill one's own people? Su Fengnian did not laugh, get angry, or say anything. He only overstepped his authority and handled military affairs in the general's mansion in Yuzhou. He was completely indifferent to Huang Shang's scolding and did not even lift his eyelids. After Grand Chancellor Wang and Huang Shang, the newly appointed provincial governor of Liuzhou, Yang Guangdou, rushed over from the land of refugees. This school of Moism's master craftsman did not seem to get angry at all. He only said a few sentences, "That's enough," and Chen Shiliang did quite well. After that, he came and left in a hurry. He did not even have time to drink a mouthful of hot tea or eat a mouthful of hot rice. Other than these white-haired old men, the rest were at least of the younger generation. The provincial governor of Liangzhou, Hu Kuei, was the true creator of the Torch Cavalry, the predecessor of the White Horse Scout. Beside him was Yul Wandao, the eldest grandson of the Yinyang Yu clan, who had once written the Liangzhou's Big Horse Song. This guy had gone to the land of refugees alone and did not seem to have been killed or killed. There was also Song Yan, who had just become the provincial governor of Lingzhou, and Wang Shihua, the head of the Wang clan in Huangnam County in Lingzhou. These two were once opponents with different political views in the same county. They could not be said to be mortal enemies. Wang Shihua, who was famous for his moral writings in Beiliang, and Li Gongda, the administrator, who was focused on currying favor for personal gain, were the real mortal enemies. When these people all gathered in the general's mansion in Yuzhou, it was raining heavily on the next morning. Su Fengnian planned to call everyone to go to the newly built Green Deer Cave Academy. However, Song Yan and Wang Shihua had already left early. Therefore, Su Fengnian did not send anyone to invite them. Huang Fuxi, who had not had a chance to show his face recently, was in charge of escorting 100 cavalrymen. His face was as calm as water, without any sadness or joy. Lu Dian, the deputy general of Yuzhou, who had been cursed as the great executioner Lu, was even more worried. Only the provincial governor Wang Peifong, who was the head of the civil officials in Yuzhou, was at the back of the team. Sitting high on the horse, his thin body, which was not as strong as that of a warrior, was undulating with the horse, unable to hide the joy on his face. Blessings and misfortunes were interdependent, especially when misfortunes turned into blessings. Even if Wang Peifong had a strong will, how could he not feel jubilant? Although Yuzhou was in chaos, the academy at the foot of Green Deer Mountain was the only pure land left in Yuzhou. Nearly 100 scholars had entered the academy to study peacefully. They either buried their heads in classics or gathered together to learn from each other. The only imperfection was the two temporary leaders of the academy. Every month, they were required to produce a meritorious article that was suspected to be eager for quick success and instant benefits. The more words, the better. For example, how to deal with salt and iron in Beiliang, how to deal with the constraints of the imperial court, how to eradicate the shackles of the party struggle, how to solve the misfortune of officials, how to define the prime minister and the prime minister, and even how to balance the prime minister's power and so on. Undoubtedly, many topics were forbidden for scholars. However, there were still scholars who could not resist the huge temptation of 100 to 500 taels of silver for each article that won the first place every month. As the old saying goes, there is a house of gold in a book. Not to mention the house of gold, didn't the latter too require real money? The sages only said it in an implicit way, but the logic behind it was very real. Although the Green Deer Cave Academy was still in its embryonic form, and the most important aspect of an academy was the lack of spirit, Huang Shang was in a good mood after he ascended the mountain. He did not care about showing any attitude to the Prince of Northern Liang. He stroked his beard and smiled, feeling gratified. Although the imperial court did not forbid the discussion of famous scholars, the Prince of Northern Liang could even ignore the rebellious words of the Prince of Northern Liang. In the eyes of the old imperial censor, this was the true source of the seeds of learning. One could express one's thoughts in one's mind and put them into writing. Thus, it would be recorded in the annals of history for future generations to comment on. This was the true fortune of all scholars. Huang Chong stood at the entrance of the academy and was not in a hurry to cross the threshold. He looked up at the inscribed board written by the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, and stopped in his tracks. His eyes brimmed with tears and his lips trembled as he asked, "Can you really tolerate scholars of my generation to be like Huang Chong yesterday, to happily scold you Su Fengnian and Beiliang?" Chapter 1045. Su Fengnian nodded and said, "There's no harm in scolding people. It's enough as long as you scholars can maintain your integrity. It's even better if you can still think about sincerely helping the world. If one day, there's a martial artist from Beiliang who dares to kill you with a knife, as long as the reason is in your heart and not in the knife in their hand, I will protect you." Huang Chong said a few good words in succession. His sleeves fluttered as he strode into Green Deer Cave Academy with Grand Chancellor Wang. After walking for a while, he suddenly realized that the young man from Su family didn't follow him. Instead, he stood in the same place. Huang Chong turned his head with a puzzled expression. Su Fengnian said, "From today onwards, as long as the martial artists of Bailiang wear armor and carry a knife, none of them are allowed to take half a step into the academy. You scholars can rest assured and pursue your studies. I don't have extravagant hopes that the scholars and martial artists of Bailiang can treat each other with respect and get along harmoniously tomorrow. However, at the very least you have to mind your own business and do your own job. However, I'll say the ugly words first. Scholars fish for fame and take advantage of this to gain a good reputation. I, Su Fengnian, can turn a blind eye to this. However, if you dare to use your 3-inch tongue and the pen in your hand to cause chaos and disturb the people, you will definitely lose a few layers of skin. At that time, don't even mention you, Huang Chong, scolding me for going back on my words. Even if you fight with your life on the line, I will still be merciless. Huang Chong won't show any mercy even if I kill you." Huang Chong wanted to say something but stopped. Grand Chancellor Wang, who had long since boarded the pirate ship of Bailiang, laughed softly beside Huang Chong. "Old man Huang, where do you get so pedantic and sour breath from? Scholars aren't afraid of being poor, but when scholars are sour, the things they write will be worthless than pickled vegetables." Huang Chong sighed and didn't insist anymore. Yul Wandao wanted to follow him into the academy, but Hu Kuei, the provincial governor of Liangzhou, quietly stopped him and shook his head. Unexpectedly, Yul Wandao took off his family's famous sword, Big Luan, and handed it to Hu Kuei. Then he smiled and said, "I was just bored and wanted to go in and take a look. I have studied for more than 20 years and have read enough. In the future, I will die on the battlefield. According to the king of Bailiang, I probably won't have a chance to set foot here in my life. So I should take the opportunity to take a look at the academy before I put on my armor and sword. I can hear the sound of wind and rain no matter what I do. I can even hear the sound of horses' hooves and the sound of fighting. But I really won't have the chance to hear the sound of the academy's study that I've been familiar with since I was young." Su Fengnian looked at the back of the young man who was about the same age as him. He took the saber from Hu Kuei's hand. He didn't unsheathe the saber, only flicking the scabbard with his finger. He asked with a smile, "You're called the Luan saber?" The young man who was called Yu family is proud again, after Chao Chongqing in Guangling Road turned around and said with a smile, "Yes." The young vassal king who had been giving people a gloomy impression these days chuckled and said, "Even if you are a spy of Liang, Bailiang will be willing to accept you because of your appearance." Yul Wandao looked sad and said, "I'm not a girl who hasn't been married yet. The king of Bailiang judges me by my appearance. I really can't be happy." Su Fengnian returned the big Luan saber to Hu Kuei and then waved his hand with a smile, indicating that Yul Wandao should enter the academy. After Yul Wandao leisurely walked into the Green Deer Cave Academy, Su Fengnian turned around and walked to the fence of the square in front of the academy. He waved at Wang Peifong. This Yuzhou provincial governor was a real literati, but he didn't enter the academy. The people outside were all real generals, so Wang Peifong felt a bit awkward. In the past, Governor Wang was afraid, but he was afraid that Su Fengnian was the eldest son of General Su Shao. He was afraid that this young man would definitely inherit the throne. Even if Su Fengnian succeeded in taking the throne, Wang Peifong believed that he still had some pride as a scholar when facing the new king of Liang as a subject. Unfortunately, he didn't have any spirit left after seeing the new king of Liang kill people in Yuzhou. Wang Peifong carefully stood behind the new king of Liang. Su Fengnian looked into the distance. Switch positions with Hu Kuei. The provincial governor of Liangzhou has always been half a level higher than the provincial governor of Yuzhou. Yu Wang Peifong have been promoted and become rich in the eyes of outsiders. But you and Hu Kuei, who has been demoted in name, you know how important you two are in this king's heart. Sweat appeared on Wang Peifong's forehead. He bent down and said in a small voice, "This lowly official understands." Su Fengnian made a sound of acknowledgement. "Go to the academy." Wang Peifong hurriedly turned and jogged into the academy. Su Fengnian's eyelids jumped. He shifted his gaze slightly and looked at the foot of the mountain. A moment later he said to Hu Kuei, "Hu Kuei, you are a general and know that a place like Yuzhou is not like Lingzhou where Li Gongda is in charge. This place is pretty much hopeless, and there are generals everywhere. These people are used to using their fists and knives to reason with. It is useless to talk to them until you break your tongue. Now it will depend on your ability. Hu Kuei, who had experienced ups and downs, nodded heavily. He did not say anything heroic. Su Fengnian continued, Lu Dian, you will go to the border of Liangzhou tomorrow and assist Yuan Zuozong. This king knows that you are the most aggrieved this time. The deputy general of Yuzhou, Lu Dian, lowered his head and cupped his fists. This lowly general obeys. This lowly general is a rough man. I don't know how to say nice things. I am only willing to die for Bailiang. Su Fengnian turned around and stared at Huang Fuxi. You are still the general of Yuzhou. In fact, what you said in the restaurant that day was not wrong. But there are some things that are not right or wrong. This king is not the same as you and Hu Kuei. There is no need to talk nonsense. I have said everything that needs to be said since you are the general of Yuzhou. But there is one thing that you should understand. This king is no longer the Jianghu man who has to be restrained in everything he does. In Bailiang, if this king does not give you face, who will? Who dares? Huang Fujin, who had been acting like a dog with his tail between his legs in front of Su Fengnian all this time, chuckled for the first time. With these words, even if Huang Fujin were to be fried in a frying pan 100 times, I would have earned back my capital. Su Fengnian did not reveal anything. He went down the mountain alone in the slanting wind and drizzling rain. He went to meet the two people climbing the mountain. The old eunuch, Zhao Siku, who had traveled thousands of li from the south of the capital to Bailiang. Even the mountain opening talisman had peeled off the high tree dew at the beginning of the climb. Su Fengnian knew that this meeting was truly a matter of life and death. But only by passing this hurdle could Su Fengnian face the Beimang Iron Cavalry without any distracting thoughts. Only then would he be able to make another trip to northern Mang alone in a situation that could not be any worse. He. The girl had unknowingly followed behind him. Su Fengnian stopped and shook his head at her. She also shook her head. Su Fengnian laughed and scolded. Are you stupid? The young assassin chuckled. This time, she was truly laughing. The wind and rain were still there. There were no more sounds of reading from the academy, but there were still chuckles. Su Fengnian walked close to the young girl and helped her adjust a familiar gold hairpin in her hair. You are like your mother, and also pretty. The young girl wrinkled her nose. It was unknown whether she was happy or sad. She glanced at him and then crouched on the steps. She did not follow him down the mountain. Su Fengnian turned around. His hands pressed down on the spring thunder, and he resolutely went down the mountain with the soldiers crossing the river. Not far from the foot of the mountain, Gao Shulu grabbed the sleeve of the old Martin Temple of Great Peace City and threw him down the mountain. He floated back to the foot of the mountain. The old eunuch, whose body was extremely weak, was not harmed at all. Gao Shulu opened his arms and breathed in deeply. Then he lifted the wind and rain that had not yet fallen to the ground back up to the 9 heavens. At the same time, the two-sleeved snake rolled down the mountain. Chapter 1046. As far as Gao Shulu's eyes could see, it was like the Milky Way. The green sword chi that rolled down from the mountain rushed toward him. Gao Shulu's expression was calm. He put his hands behind his back and continued to climb the stairs instead of retreating. However, when his left foot stepped on the stone step, the green sword chi rushed toward him as soon as he lifted his right foot. Although Gao Shulu did not make any movements, the sword chi slid past him like a flood hitting a reef. However, his hair still fluttered violently. His right foot that was suspended in the air did not land on the stone step as expected. Instead, it retreated to a step lower than his left foot. Gao Shulu reached out his right hand and blocked some of the green sword chi. He held it in his palm and the sword chi lingered between his fingers. With one hand behind his back, Gao Shulu looked down and was slightly surprised as if he was an expert who saw something interesting. He reached out his hand again and his palms faced each other. With a gentle touch, a 3-inch sword chi like a sword embryo was formed. Gao Shulu placed the flying sword condensed by the green sword chi on the tip of his index finger and stared at it gently. This devil who had been lingering at death's door for 400 years was so arrogant that he did not even look at the people who came down the mountain. At the same time, Su Fengnian, who used the green snake sleeves, went straight to the point. He held the spring thunder saber in his left hand and the river-crossing soldier in his right hand chopped at Gao Shulu's head. It was the opening shoe style that was born from the sword chi rolling dragon wall. Gao Shulu flicked his fingers and the 3-inch sword chi that was used to figure out the essence of the first vast sword chi disappeared. He reached out his palm to break the blade light and casually pressed down on the extremely sharp river-crossing soldier. A trace of blood appeared on his 5 fingers, but they returned to normal before the blood bloomed. In the blink of an eye, he repeated this no less than 6 times, but the river-crossing soldier still could not cut off his 5 fingers. This was no longer as simple as the Vajra physique. It was the perfect combination of the Vajra state and celestial state of the first pin 4 states. Perhaps only the great Vajra of the Buddhist saint, Dragon Tree Monk, could compare. The soldier crossing the river was restrained by Gao Shulu's unmoving 5 fingers, but this sorry-free celestial, who was said to be unprecedented, was not really completely motionless. At the very least, his feet sank more than a foot, one in front and one behind. He was pushed by the majestic saber chi and finally broke the stairs. Gao Shulu's gaze had been fixed on the short knife that was about to be used. Obviously, in his opinion, when masters fought with their lives on the line, what was really worth paying attention to were the backup moves that were ready to be used. No matter how good the first move was, no matter how wonderful it was, Gao Shulu had seen it and dissected it. 400 years ago, he had killed almost all the top masters in Jianghu, and there were 2 sword immortals on the land. How many mysterious moves and superior moves had he experienced? However, there were only a handful of so-called masters who dared to fight him at close range, even though they knew that he was Gao Shulu. In the murky Jianghu 400 years ago, one could count with one's fingers. Unexpectedly, the short knife was raised only a few inches before he suddenly withdrew it. Not only that, the long saber above his head was also pulled out from between his fingers. Gao Shulu frowned. A fellow who dared to enter the astral travel state in front of him had a good start. How could he have run out of skills so quickly? Could it be that he was one of those half-baked martial artists who only knew 3 axes in Jianghu 400 years ago? If that was the case, what was so interesting about the Jianghu 400 years later? Was it worth it for him to strip off the mountain-splitting talisman and hope to fight with all his strength? Was it really better to go to the East Sea Martial Emperor city than to come to Bailiang? However, Gao Shulu, who was too lazy to take advantage of the situation to pursue him, smiled as soon as he frowned. Unknowingly, a few red ropes shaped like red snakes had appeared on the back of his hand. They were like weeds in the wilderness after the early spring rain, growing wildly. Not only that, the 9 smooth flying swords of the sword embryo buzzed and flew around him, forming a seemingly insurmountable thunder pool. Of course, in Gao Shulu's eyes, all of this was just a smokescreen. The real killing move was hidden in the blade that came down the mountain. The young man had been preparing for this blade since the green sword chi rolled down the mountain. Su Fengnian's figure retreated and swayed. He faced Gao Shulu and floated up the mountain in reverse. Step by step, he ascended the stairs in a leisurely and carefree manner. The spring thunder returned to its scabbard. When it returned to its scabbard, thunder rumbled in the distance. For the first time, Gao Shulu waved both of his sleeves at the same time. In an instant, he patted the ground 5 times in a row. He was so relaxed that he didn't look like he was trying to counter every move that came his way. Instead, he looked like a distinguished scholar who was casually giving advice. After a short while, 5 thunderous booms sounded on Green Deer Mountain. After Gao Shulu patted the thunderheart away, the sword formation retracted. Perhaps Gao Shulu was busy stripping off the red ropes on the back of his hand, but he didn't try to block it. Instead, he dodged it. He was no longer arrogant enough to ignore it. Su Fengnian stood on a high ground and held 2 of his fingers together to control the flying swords. Originally, after the sword embryo was fully developed, the flying swords would move according to the will of the spirit. Only when the sword embryo was fully developed would the flying swords move according to the will of the spirit. However, this time, Su Fengnian used his chi to control the flying swords. He was extraordinarily meticulous and careful. Gao Shulu didn't underestimate him either. Compared to how he dispelled the Thunderheart just now, Gao Shulu paid the same amount of attention. Su Fengnian wasn't complacent at all. In terms of moves, the 2 methods were polar opposites. However, the results they pursued were exactly the same. Gu Jiantong's Thunderheart wanted to kill an Earth Immortal. On the other hand, Dong Tai's flying swords in the Eastern Sea was the out-of-body celestial Zhao Xuansu from Mount Longhu. Su Fengnian went down the mountain and Gao Shulu went up the mountain. After the 2 met, Su Fengnian's welcoming ceremony was truly shocking. There was the old man with the sheepskin fur coat's green snake sleeves and the sword chi rolling dragon wall. There was also Gu Jiantong's ultimate move, the Thunder Heart. There was also the invincible earth immortal Han Shengshuan's red rope and Dong Tai's flying swords. Su Fengnian and Gao Shulu didn't stand on ceremony at all. However, judging from the current situation, the tall demon was still quite polite. After dodging the flying swords that could kill a celestial, Gao Shulu didn't fly into a rage out of humiliation. Instead, she was a little lost in thought. She sighed softly and said, "In my opinion, all the martial arts in the world are nothing more than one's will. It's inevitable that the majority of experts will either be ambitious or short-tempered. This is especially true when it comes to the battle of sword chi and sword will. 100 years before I became famous, Ancestor Lu already had the distinction of sword art and sword art. It's not easy to have both sword will and sword will. Back in the day, Gao Mumu was a master in the same Jianghu. In terms of swordsmanship, Gao Mumu seemed to have lost to the two swordsmen whom Gao Mumu had secretly learned from. Earlier, when Gao Mumu's sword chi descended the mountain, he had the spirit of an ancestor who had surpassed him. Later, when the flying sword pierced the celestial aperture point, he had truly reached the peak of swordsmanship. May I ask, who are these two swordsmen? Are they still alive? Su Fengnian said calmly, "One is called Li Chun Gang. He doesn't belong to any sect. It's a pity that he's already dead. The other is called Dong Tai. He came from the Wu family's sword tomb that the sword master killed for you. He's now out on the sea to visit immortals and hasn't returned yet." Gao Shulu smiled and said, "It's not without reason that sword art can dominate the Wulin world. For thousands of years, the world's sword mountains have always been one peak higher than the other. There's never been a bad habit of worshipping the past and belittling the present." Gao Shulu suddenly turned to look outside the mountain. "Your way of cultivating the blade intent is very rare. I've waited for so long. Is it about time?" Su Fengnian smiled and tapped the spring thunder's handle with one hand. He stabbed the scabbard into the stone steps behind him. Not only that, he also stabbed the river-crossing soldier into the steps. Only the scabbard of the river-crossing soldier was left hanging on his waist. Su Fengnian had nothing to rely on, but his momentum suddenly rose. He looked down from above. The division of first class into 4 realms has been used for 400 years. Most of the people in Jianghu today don't know that it's actually from you, Gao Shulu. I'm very curious about what you think of the false realms. Gao Shulu had the magnanimity of a great master. Even if they were facing death, she still said straightforwardly, "The false realms are not false." It's roughly equivalent to the Buddha's revealing and secret techniques. Tantric Buddhism has a shortcut to Buddhahood, but it's not available to everyone. The key lies in who's cultivating. Gao Shulu paused and smiled. Life is not satisfying. Those who seek freedom often feel uncomfortable. If you want something, you can't get it. The reason is simple. Chapter 1047. Gao Shulu, who had just taken half a step up the stairs, instantly leaped up the mountain and collided with Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian's mind was connected as he recalled the time when he rode an ox on Mount Wudong. Gao Shulu stretched out her hand but was grabbed by Su Fengnian's hands. With a twist of his toes, Gao Shulu's feet left the ground and was thrown out. However, Su Fengnian could not break free from Gao Shulu's pull. Both of them left the stone steps and fell out of the mountain. Gao Shulu was smashed down by Su Fengnian's immortal's touch on the top, while Su Fengnian was supported by Gao Shulu's palm and leaped up. The distance between the two was instantly shortened to more than 400 feet. Gao Shulu stood in the air, looking as cool as ever. Su Fengnian's momentum of being thrown up slowed down. With a roll of his sleeves, the thousands of raindrops that Gao Shulu had pushed back to the 9 heavens on Mount Green Deer fell together with Su Fengnian. The raindrops in the sky were divided into different levels. Under the pull of qi, the higher the raindrops were, the faster the raindrops fell. Thus, the raindrops were strung together into a sword. If only a line of raindrops formed a sword, it was nothing more than the Finger Xian realm. However, when thousands of raindrops were strung together into a curtain of beads, it was undoubtedly the magnificent spirit of the celestial realm. Not only that, Su Fengnian stretched out his hand and pulled the curtain of rain. The tip of the sword was pointed at the side of his hand. Following Su Fengnian's falling figure, it pointed at Gao Shulu, who was looking up with her hands behind her back. Borrowing the power of heaven and earth was often not up to oneself. This was also the reason why there were earth immortals above the celestial realm. The string of beads forming a sword referred to the Xian realm, the rain sword forming a curtain referred to the celestial realm, and the direction of the sword curtain referred to the worthy earth immortals. Previously, under Gao Shulu's celestial work, Green Deer Mountain no longer saw the gloomy scene of wind and rain, allowing Green Deer Mountain to monopolize the light. At this time, the sword screen covered the sky above, a dark mass, and the heavy rain destroyed the mountain. The people of the Green Deer Cave Academy did not hear the sound of the wind, nor did they hear the sound of raindrops hitting the eaves. They already thought it was too wonderful for words, and now they stopped flipping the books and whispering to each other. They walked out of the room together, and saw the sword aura tornado falling down the mountain rapidly. They were so shocked that they looked at each other in dismay, and all of them turned pale. Yule Wandao hurriedly ran out of the academy and stood beside the fence with Hu Kuei and Huang Fuqing. He raised his head to look at the young vassal king who was guiding the tornado in the sky. The young vassal king who was the proudest of the Guangling world was gone. Yule Wandao's heavens earth's ants. Gao Shulu twitched the corner of her mouth and yawned lazily. She was finally out of her body. Gao Shulu's body landed on the ground instantly. Gao Shulu, who should be called astral being, came to the ninth heaven above the rain curtain. The person on the ground raised a palm, and the person in the sky slapped down. You Su Fengyan have thousands of swords, but I, Gao Shulu, only have one sword. In front of this sword, is there any earth immortal? Is there any earth immortal's sword? This was similar to Luo Yang's one-line sword of heaven and earth. Su Fengyan, who was temporarily at a disadvantage, was not afraid at all. He smiled gently. Do you really think that I have not seen the scenery above the ninth floor? Su Fengyan snapped his fingers. The thousands of raindrops lost their traction and fell down in disorder. He sat cross-legged in the sky with one hand supporting his cheek and closed his eyes. Gao Shulu, so what if you are a heaven and earth? I have been waiting for you to do this. Su Fengyan waved his hand gently, as if he was facing a desk. He pushed away the debris on the desk with one hand, and then he raised his arm 5 more times. It was exactly the same as his Xiao Yao Yu after the battle with Wang Xianji. He said softly, mountains, rivers, towers, grass, sun, moon, all living beings. Everyone, retreat. Between the two Gao Shulu, the heaven and earth was distorted. The rain swords were all smashed. But this chaos, after Su Fengyan said one sentence, it became a prophecy. The thousands of rain swords gathered again. Sword come. The thousands of rain swords, only one sword was left. One sword became a talisman. The talisman sealed the mountain. 400 years ago, there was a talisman to open the mountain. 400 years later, there was a talisman to seal the mountain. This talisman came from Li Chuangong's 2 swords 2 wishes, from Dong Tai's riding a donkey to see the mountains and rivers, from Luo Yang's rain sword, from Lu Haoshi's thunderpool, from Han Shengshuan's matchless finger, from Song Yanqing's earth immortal sword before his death, from Shenyuan Jingqing's facing death, from Chao Chongqing's ceremony of Grand Peace City, from Jiang Ni's riding sword straight through 18 gates, and so on. It came from all the romantic things that Su Fengyan had encountered in his life, and also from his 10th trance. He sat on Kunlun to see the sea, he trained his saber to cultivate his will, he invited Jinwu Great Emperor to come down from the Spring God Lake, he saw her 400 years ago when he was in a trance, and that talisman of himself. Once the talisman came out, Su Fengyan did not care anymore. He also entered an astral state and sat down beside Gao Shulu. This astral wanderer was not flustered and exasperated. Instead, he looked at the heaven and earth leisurely. Su Fengyan asked softly, Gao Shulu, if you were to compete with me in martial arts, I would definitely lose. Why did you choose to compete in realms? Gao Shulu said indifferently, what's the point of a sure win situation to me, Gao Shulu? 400 years ago, I had not tasted defeat. What's the point of having another battle after 400 years? Su Fengyan shook his head. Gao Shulu said calmly, when I was climbing the mountain, I only wanted to know if this generation's oblivion could really forget their worries. To be honest, I did not think highly of you before. If you could forget your worries, there would be no one in the world who would be worried. Back then, when I chose to enter Qi deviation to forget everything, those who did not know me would say what I wanted. Those who seemed to know me would say that I was worried. In fact, they only knew half of it. In these 400 years, You are probably the only one who truly knows me. Su Fengnian said slowly, you, Gao Shulu, were once a prince of the Dafeng dynasty who was about to ascend the throne 400 years ago. It was just that you wanted to become an immortal and did not want to be the emperor of the human world. Then, you visited the ancestral court of Taoism, Wudong Mountain, and asked a question. What is the meaning of the word immortal? At that time, Ancestor Lu reincarnated and had not yet enlightened his orifices. You went to Longhu Mountain, but no one could explain it. Or rather, they only gave half of it. The word immortal has two meanings. Now, there are two mountains, Wudong and Longhu. The former explains half of the word immortal, while the latter explains half of the word mountain. Longhu Mountain wants to become an immortal, so they have to go up the mountain and be a mountain person. They want to become an immortal and ignore the matters below the mountain. Wudong Mountain inherited the will of Ancestor Lu. They cultivate on the mountain, but obtain the Tao below the mountain. They cultivate themselves and others, which is more in line with what you, Gao Shulu, want. Unfortunately, the Taoist priest on the mountain clearly had this intention, but he could not explain it. However, even if he did, it might not be to your liking. From your point of view, being an immortal does not forget being a human. Once you pass the gate of heaven and become an immortal, you are no longer a human. As an immortal, if you want to descend the mountain, you have to follow the fate of the world. How can you be called a free and unfettered heaven and earth? Therefore, what you want to be is a unique celestial being on the land, not a mountain person above the 9 heavens. Gao Shulu sighed. Yes, the world is divided and united. What do I have to worry about? Su Fengnian smiled. Gao Shulu retracted her gaze. A swordsman returned from the sea, returning from a visit to an immortal. His sword pointed somewhere in the South China Sea. It should be the Dong Tai you mentioned. I want to ask one last question. What do you want? Su Fengnian folded his hands in his sleeves and said calmly, I don't want to think about the past and future lives. It's enough that I have no regrets in this life. Gao Shulu said with slight regret, the Jianghu after 400 years is so interesting. It's a pity that the will that supported my body and soul for 400 years is an arrow at the end of its flight. 400 years ago, the Dafeng dynasty almost unified the world, but the barbarians from the north destroyed the capital. How about it? Su Fengnian nodded. I was waiting for you to say that. Su Fengnian flicked his finger and unlocked the talisman that sealed the mountain. Gao Shulu on the ground leaped up and merged with Gao Shulu in the sky. Su Fengnian also came back to his senses after the 11th time he was in a trance. Gao Shulu stood up and looked back at the world. She smiled and walked towards Su Fengnian. 400 years ago, Gao Shulu, who was truly the leader of the entire Jianghu, brushed past Su Fengnian and disappeared just like that. She came without worries and left without worries. I already know life and death and am not afraid of death. Why should I fear death? I have already attained immortality and am not in love with it. Why should I tempt it with immortality? At this moment, thunder rumbled and purple clouds formed. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Above Green Deer Mountain, there was a shocking scene of an impending calamity. There seemed to be celestial beings riding celestial dragons in the clouds and mist. They came out of the lightning and wanted to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. Su Fengnian slowly raised his head, the corners of his mouth curling up into a sneer. Behind him, a snow-white giant python condensed from fate energy coiled up. It had 9 claws and opened its mouth big enough to swallow a mountain, roaring at the sky. Then there was no more. Because soon, the world became completely silent. Chapter 1048. The old eunuch had never practiced martial arts, but the imperial palace of Great Peace City never lacked experts. The old man was also one of the top Diao Temple eunuchs. He was knowledgeable and had some insight. The old man inhaled sharply as he watched the immortals fight on the mountain. The wind and rain at the end of spring in Bailiang were especially bone-chilling. Zhao Siku found it even more difficult to endure, especially when the old man saw the slender figure slowly walk down the mountain. Each step seemed to step on his already heavy heart. He felt his teeth hurt. When the young man with the blade walked to the foot of the mountain, old Diao Temple jogged forward with a tragic feeling of dying early and reincarnating. He was about to say a few words of flattery. He did not expect that this king of Bailiang would not hit a smiling person. It would be good to have an easy death under his hands. Unexpectedly, the other person waved his hand and spoke first. This king thanks old Mr. Zhao on behalf of Bailiang. Our place is not as prosperous as Great Peace City, but this king can give old Mr. a place to rest in his old age. Zhao Siku stilled. He heard the person who had come close continue to say with a smile, "The Su family owes Zhao Chongling too much, but they cannot repay him. Since old Mr. is an old friend of Zhao Yongkai of Bailiang, and you risked your life for Bailiang and did not disappoint this king's master. Old Mr., do not worry. This king has said so much in hopes that old Mr. will be assured." The old man smiled freely and said with slight self-mockery, "Our family is a eunuch that everyone curses. Is he worthy of being called Mr.? Wang Ye's words. Do you want us to work ourselves to the bone again? If that's the case, then the word Mr. is not enough." Su Fengnian laughed and said, "I knew that old Mr. Zhao would not be assured." The old man bent down and asked doubtfully, "Can we really live and die however we want in Bailiang?" Su Fengnian nodded with a smile. Zhao Siku sighed heavily and looked up at the top of Green Deer Mountain that had become calm. He said softly with the unique sharp voice of a eunuch, "Since your highness is kind, then I will be bold to say something disgraceful." Back then, the young master favored Chen Jibao. After all, the soldier immortal in white did not control Bailiang. We can't say that the young master misjudged him. But if the young master could live until today, he probably wouldn't be too angry. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "If Zhao Chongling does not die, this king will have nothing to do with Bailiang." Zhao Siku looked deeply at the young vassal king and said emotionally, "I cannot see through your highness's personality right now. But your words are true and comfortable to hear." The old eunuch turned to look in the direction of Great Peace City. The people there like to be shrouded in clouds and mist. No matter how good the weather is, people will feel gloomy. Su Fengnian did not make a judgment and said softly, "Bailiang is windy and sandy all year round. The winters are hard to endure. But standing there, the view is wide. If you stay for a long time, you will feel gloomy. When the wind blows and the snow presses down, it will lessen." The old eunuch smiled from the bottom of his heart and said, "Borrowing the king of Bailiang's auspicious words. Originally, I thought I had completed the young master's last wish and was content. I had not thought I could live a few more years." Su Fengnian turned and saw the empty-handed Hehe Mississippi. The young girl was shaking her wrist in boredom. Su Fengnian said to Zhao Siku, "Sir, why don't you go up the mountain to see the scenery? When the time comes, you can go down the mountain with Kue Hu, Huang Fuqiu, and the others." The old man smiled and said, "Yes, I have to walk and see more while my legs are still nimble." The old eunuch brushed past the young girl. The old man said to himself, "When the Qin dynasty lost its deer, the heroes of the world chased after it. 800 years of separation and unification. 400 years ago, the great Feng dynasty showed signs of unifying the north and the south. But in the end, the barbarians of the north invaded the Central Plains. None of the dynasties after that were free of worry about the north. This dynasty is no exception. The Grand Secretary, Zhang Julu, had been in charge of the imperial court for more than 20 years. Half of his time was spent watching the northern land's border. Even if he joined forces with the Grand General, Gu Jiantang, he could only pull the disadvantageous situation to a stalemate. Now that Li Yong is going to commit suicide, what will happen to the world? Alas, I have never understood this world. Scholars can't tolerate eunuchs, scholars can't tolerate common men, and scholars can't even tolerate scholars in the end. I have read all the classics handed down by the sage of the Zhang family, but I can't see such a reason. After thinking about it, I think it's probably because those at the top must be worse than those at the bottom. I really want to open my eyes and see if the scholars here will be slightly different." Su Fengnian laughed softly and said, "As expected of someone from Zhao Chongling's family." The young girl tilted her head. Su Fengnian took her hand and said softly, "Let's not think so much." She said softly, "Old Huang thinks even more." Chapter 1049. Su Fengnian pulled her into the carriage parked at the foot of the mountain. Su Yanbing, who had not acted from beginning to end, studied Su Fengnian. The two nodded without speaking. Su Fengnian was finally able to catch his breath. He said casually to the young girl, "For a strategist, the size of one's weapon is one thing, and one's position is another. Yuan Benqi's ranking among the strategists of the spring and autumn period has always been higher than my master Li Yishan, Yang Kai Zhao Chongling, and Nalin Yusi behind the king of Yen. In reality, it may not be that Benqi's talent is higher than the others, but his position means that he has more room to plan, and he can hold more things in his hands. This is like a housewife who has enough firewood, rice, oil, and salt. The food she makes will naturally be more sumptuous. On our side in Baelyang, we have Su Beiji and Chen Xilyang. If Baelyang is not trampled by Bei Mang, their future achievements will not be low. But it is difficult to say how high they will be. Lu Su of Xiangfan City is the same. This is also why Sun Yin, who studied the dragon slayer art, was not willing to stay in Baelyang. There were pythons but no dragons in Baelyang. He did not want them. However, being in the imperial court of Liang had its advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage was that there were too many people under the emperor's nose. Even if there were talented people like Su Beiji and Chen Xilyang, it would be difficult for them to stand out as quickly as they did in northern Liang. Secondly, as the Zhao Jiao temple said, scholars could not tolerate scholars and scholars looked down on each other. There were many rules in the imperial court of Zhao. Many scholars' lofty aspirations could not be fulfilled and most of them groaned for no reason. However, there were still some people who were born at the wrong time and did not get the chance to appreciate their talents. If Huang Longshe was born in the present, I'm afraid even becoming the Grand Chancellor of Shangyin Academy would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens, let alone becoming the great devil of spring and autumn, Huang Sonjia. Su Fengnian glanced at the girl and said helplessly, "What are you glaring at me for? I am not speaking ill of your old Huang. I am praising him. My master said that he is an extraordinary person, an extraordinary talent. I do not dare to underestimate Huang Longshe." Su Fengnian's thoughts immediately drifted away. This Zhao Zhu's luck is good to the point where it can be considered good luck. To be able to make Huang Longshe, Northern Mang's imperial preceptor, Daoist Qilin, Yuan Qingshan, and Nalin Yusi, these three people take notice of him at the same time. Zhao Kai, who had died outside the Iron Gate, only had two masters, Yang Taisui and Han Shengxian. Compared to Zhao Zhu, he was much weaker. As for the fourth prince, Zhao Zhuan, he is already the crown prince of a country. Anyway, the ownership of Liangjiang Mountain depends on these two. On the way back to the general's mansion in Yuzhou in Iha City, they encountered two groups of assassinations that were like throwing eggs at a rock. They were intercepted and killed by the spies even before the driver and the three people sitting in the carriage did anything. Baelyang's folk customs were already valiant, not to mention the loyal men of sacrifice who were raised by the family. Most of these men of sacrifice were staunch and unyielding. They did not regard other people's lives as valuable playthings, and even did not regard their own lives as valuable. They all believed that if you raised me for 10 or 20 years, I would repay you with my life. They were willing to regard this as righteousness, heroism, and chivalry as the most important thing. Outsiders could not say whether this was right or wrong. Su Fengnian lifted the curtain and looked at the pair of eyes lying in a pool of blood. He did not have any compassion, but he thought of many things outside of Baelyang. For example, the emperor of the Zhao family, in terms of his surname, was enough to be a once-in-a-century wise monarch in history. However, after he ascended the throne, he wanted to kill Su Xiao, and now he wanted to kill the meritorious minister of Liang, Zhang Julu. It was not that he was not a good emperor, but he could tolerate the dissolute scholars of the Hanlin Academy. He could tolerate Zhang Julu, and he could tolerate the remnants of the Eight Kingdoms stirring up trouble with his pen and ink. As the emperor of the world, he must have his own difficulties. No matter how hard he was willing to work day and night for the common people, he still had to consider the gains and losses of the Zhao family first. Zhang Julu could, regardless of his own gains and losses, open the door for the poor scholars in the world to advance. It could even be said that Bai Yan did not only exchange one person's death for the 4,000 rooms of the 6 ministries, but also for the poor scholars to have a foothold in the imperial court. Coincidentally, the emperor of the Zhao family was not a short-sighted person. Even if in the next 100 years, the poor scholars could still scrupulously abide by the etiquette of monarch and minister, wholeheartedly working for the emperor, but 200 years later, would they still be able to do so? If in the imperial court, everybody was like Zhang Julu, taking care of both the Zhao family and the world, or even prioritizing the common people over the emperor, so much so that they only cared about the world and ignored the Zhao family, when this door was opened, who could close it? This was not an exaggeration to scare people. The poor scholars were not as good as the rich and powerful children, they had this and that kind of rules. The rich and powerful children were used to wearing good shoes, so they were reluctant to take them off. However, the poor scholars were barefooted. If they did not care, they had talent and learning, so who didn't help them? So much so that they might as well sit on the dragon chair themselves. Therefore, the emperor of the Zhao family killing Zhang Julu was indeed killing the #1 meritorious minister of the Liang dynasty. But it was also an act of helplessness to close the door that was wide open. Master Li Yishan could see these things, and so could Huang Longshi and Yuan Benshi. Zhang Julu himself was even more so. As for whether it was good or bad, Su Fengnian was not the emperor, so he did not have to worry about it. Su Fengnian muttered to himself, with Yu Zhou in such a mess, the people of Liang should think that a mouse carrying a knife is a bully in its nest. I just happen to need some time to rest. Yes, I do need to recuperate. The young girl stretched out a hand, staring straight at Su Fengnian, whose gray hair was turning darker. Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. The young girl bent a finger, her eyes inquiring. For? Su Fengnian still shook his head. She slowly bent another finger. Su Fengnian continued to shake his head. When she was about to close her 2 fingers, Su Fengnian smiled and said, I haven't fought Tuoba Bodhisattva, so it's hard to say who will be second or third. The young girl was in high spirits. Su Fengnian said softly, but as long as Wang Xianji is alive, it doesn't matter whether it's second or third, or if it's the bottom 10. The young girl stretched out her finger and rubbed the indistinct purple-gold eye on Su Fengnian's forehead. It was not quite like the golden color of sunflowers in summer or autumn, but she still liked it. When she was young, apart from the man who only knew how to gamble and never be a father, there was only her and her mother, as well as the golden sunflowers in the field. Those strange men brought home by that man had also once defiled her mother in the field. She only dared to hide in the distance. Every time her mother put on her clothes, tidied her hair, and walked out of the field, she would find her daughter, who did not even dare to cry. She would gently smile at her daughter, and then hand her a sunflower she picked, and go home together. Later, her mother died, and she could only look after those sunflowers alone. Chapter 1050. Yuzhou was in turmoil, and Iha River was the center of the turbulence. In this tragedy, only in Iha City, there were 24 families and more than 40 families. No less than 700 people were killed on the spot in Iha City. Most of the people who survived were sent to the border. According to the continuous reports of the spies, the turf lords, who had wisely chosen to protect themselves, did not have much resentment now. The reason was very simple. After people died, they gained more territory. Other than the northern Liang who took away most of the profits, the leftovers were also quite considerable. These were all taken over by the fence-sitters like them. The retainers and servants who gave them food and money, the maids and maidservants from other families whom they coveted, and the precious calligraphy and paintings that were sold cheaply, were all real benefits. After Su Fengnian entered the city, he lifted the curtain and looked out several times. He could see many cold eyes, numbness, hatred, fear, hatred, and so on. When Su Fengnian returned to the general's mansion, Song Yan and Wang Shihua had not returned yet. The 2 senior officials of Lingzhou who were temporarily transferred to Yuzhou did not directly intervene in the specific affairs of Iha River. Instead, it was mostly managed by General Huang Fujin and Provincial Governor Wang Peifong. Su Fengnian did not know how these 2 political rivals could get together. At that time, he made up his mind to bring them to Yuzhou. He intended to let Song Yan serve as an assistant to the new provincial governor, Hu Kuei, who was a military general. It was not that he did not trust Hu Kuei, who had made outstanding contributions as the provincial governor of Liangzhou, but that in the future, the 4 provinces of Beiliang would complement each other and balance each other. This trend was not limited to the positions of general and provincial governor on the surface. As for Wang Shihua, who was outstanding in literary knowledge in Beiliang, it was a bit like the auspicious event in Yuzhou where there were endless bloody storms. Moreover, the Green Deer Cave Academy also needed a literary expert to hold the fort. Everything was difficult at the beginning. It was impossible to stuff all scholars into the officialdom of Beiliang at once. This was a relatively gradual process. Moreover, there were many scholars who were just there to make up the numbers. Su Fengnian sat in Huang Fujin's unusually simple study. There were not many books, and even the decorations were lacking. It was a dull and gloomy room, which was indeed similar to Huang Fujin's character. Su Fengnian was flipping through a mediocre physiognomy book. Without raising his head, he said, "Come in." The person who entered the room was surnamed Lu, the head of the spies in Iha City. He reported to the king of Beiliang what he had seen and heard today, which were all bits and pieces of the conversation between Song Yan and Wang Shihua. It turned out that after witnessing the bloodshed in Yuzhou and learning of the cause of the matter, the two of them had no objection to the punishment of the Huang family of Iha. However, they had a serious disagreement over the matter of the restaurant's property being confiscated. Wang Shihua insisted that the 65 storytellers, regardless of whether they were commoners or tyrants, did not deserve such a heavy punishment from the king of Bailiang. On the other hand, Song Yan, who had always advocated legalism, believed that everyone deserved to be punished. The two of them had rushed to Yuzhou. Originally, as expected, Song Yan would assume the position of Yuzhou's prime minister, while Wang Shihua would be in charge of the provincial administration. The two of them could not come to an agreement, so they made a bet. If Wang Shihua won, the two of them would exchange positions. Song Yan, on the other hand, said that he would definitely win and that his position would remain the same. However, when Wang Shihua saw him in the future, Song Yan would have to pay respects to his superior. Upon hearing this, Su Fingyan put down the book and said with a smile, "The two of you are really leisurely and elegant. Don't tell me you investigated the 65 people one by one." Spy Lu said softly, "That's not the case. Wang Shihua only picked 3 people." Su Fingyan nodded and said, "A scholar's spirit is because he is afraid of winning an unfair battle. Go on, tell me which 3 people he picked." The unremarkable Iha spy said respectfully, "They are Chao Shang, a disciple of the Chao family of Iha, Qi Fengyan, the shopkeeper of Qiji Silk Store, and Han Lai Kai, a villager. Among the 3, Chao Shang is a regular customer of Jingyi Xian restaurant, while the Chao family is a low-ranking family of Iha. Qi Fengyan is a live-in son-in-law and has a good reputation in Iha West Street. Han Lai Kai, on the other hand, pretended to enter the restaurant to buy wine. In fact, he was embarrassingly short of money, so he hid in the back and took the opportunity to listen to the storytellers. Regarding these matters, Song Yan and Wang Shihua carefully went through the files after the bet. Wang Shihua picked 3 people within the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, and Song Yan nodded in approval. Su Fingyan stood up and said, "Wang Shihua believes that the human heart is good and that everyone has a compassionate heart. What Song Yan learned is that the human heart is evil. The battle between the two is not a battle of moral essays. In the end, it is a battle of the human heart outside of books. If I were to guess, the loser is definitely the moral Wang Shihua, but the one who won an unfair battle is the old fox Song Yan. If we were to switch places and look for good deeds among the evil people, the loser would naturally be Song Yan. It's just that Song Yan would not agree to such a bet." The spy leader surnamed Lu hesitated for a moment, but he still gathered his courage and said, "In my humble opinion, Song Yan did not win an unfair battle. Apart from Chao Shang's 2 murder cases, the rich merchant Qi Fengyan and the villager Han Lai Kai, according to the law, should be imprisoned." Su Fingyan shook his hand. "In a place like Bailiang, chivalry is strong, but chivalry is not necessarily strong. It is easy to commit crimes, but difficult to not commit crimes." The spy was silent. Su Fengyan smiled and said, "This time, there are many clans in Iha City who are busy fishing for profits. Lu Jingxing, why don't you seize some gold and silver from their hands and treat it as a reward for your brothers? There is no reason for you to work hard and stare at them while those who don't work hard to take advantage of you. I think they won't dare to not open their mouths and spit out some fat meat. However, this king will tell you in advance that this is just a special case, not a new rule for you to do things in the future." Lu Jingxing grinned and laughed. He still didn't have the slightest craftiness of an outsider's impression of a shrewd spy. Instead, he became more and more honest. He didn't look like a cold spy who called Song Yan Wang Shihua by his name. Su Fengyan continued to pick up the book, and Lu Jingxing tactfully said goodbye. When he crossed the threshold and gently closed the door, he caught a glimpse of a little girl from the corner of his eye. From beginning to end, Lu Jingxing didn't notice such a girl. She had a golden hairpin on her head and was squatting beside a blue and white porcelain vase that was half the height of a person. She was looking at Lu Jingxing. Lu Jingxing quickly retracted his gaze, lowered his head, and completely closed the door. Not long after Lu Jingxing left, Song Yan, who was temporarily the guest of Ling Zhou, knocked on the door and entered. Su Fengyan held the book and pointed to the chair opposite the table. Song Yan sat down calmly. Su Fengyan joked, "Our Wang Gongqiao really fell into your trap." Chapter 1051. Song Yan wasn't surprised that spies found out about what happened today. During this period of time, spies were everywhere in Iha City. Along with the fact that he and Wang Shihua were eye-catching, it was expected. Song Yen said helplessly. Wang Shihua was one of the more flexible civil servants in Beiliang. If this is the case, one can see that the governance of Beiliang is still a long way off. Su Fengnian smiled towards the girl. Please bring 2 jugs of wine over. The girl left silently and brought 2 jugs of green ant wine back. Su Fengnian and Song Yen each had a jug. Su Fengnian said emotionally, in the past, I knew that it wasn't easy to be the head of the family. However, only after sitting in this position can one understand how difficult it is to be the head of the family. You have to fight with people. Evil people like the Iha River Huang family and good people like Huang Shang and Wang Shihua. You have to fight with the heavens. In the past, listening to the rain and appreciating the snow was a joyous thing. Now, you have to consider the harvest of your territory. I have a stack of secret letters to deal with. Some say that the butler Song Tonglu colluded with officials to alter his nephew's works. The children of the Liu family took farmland and were exposed. There was also a senior of the Liu family who spent a lot of money to buy a painting, but it turned out to be fake. He couldn't return it and wanted to cause trouble. A master drank wine in Liangzhou and got jealous of the general's son Zhang Feng. The latter called for people to gang up on him and the former tried to kill him. Both of them weren't good people. Logically speaking, it would be better to kill both of them. There was even a rumor that the youngest son of the deputy commander of the infantry, Wei Taizhan, brought along his belongings and moved to the neighboring Hezhou. Just the illegal gold and silver alone filled 16 large chests, which were detained by the soldiers patrolling the border. Very soon, there was a rumor that the border guards had insulted the daughter-in-law of Deputy Commander Wei first. There was also a young captain that great ancestor Gu thought highly of. For some reason, he was beaten half to death outside the pass. Song Yen said calmly, as long as one has a family, there will be conflicts. There are even gaps between father and son and wife, much less such a big Beiliang. Su Fengnian smiled and said, from now on, all the major and minor government affairs in Yu province will be handed over to you, Kuei Hu, and Huang Fu Qiong. Administrator has been fighting for you, saying that you have the power of magic but have no place to use it. He hopes that you can be of some use after moving to Yuzhou. Song Yen nodded and said, it's only right that I do my best. Su Fengnian didn't pick up the wine jug that still had more than half of it left. He stood up and walked out of the study with Song Yen. After Song Yen left, Su Fengnian found Wang Shihua, who was temporarily staying in a side courtyard of the general's official residence. He told him that he was going to meet someone. Wang Shihua was confused and followed him out of the residence. He sat in the carriage and left Iha City to the outskirts. There was an irrigation ditch here that nurtured a lush reed field. The land in Beiliang was poor, so the reeds that were quite useful had all become priceless grass. Near the reed field, there were several small villages near the river. The breeze was cool and the spring sunshine was warm. Walking on the narrow mud road, the air was filled with the fragrance of green reeds. There were groups of 3 to 5 village children picking tender buds. Su Fengnian and Wang Shihua slowly came to a small ferry by the river. The clumps of reeds nestled together gracefully. It was a rare tender and charming scenery in Beiliang. Su Fengnian had an empty stem of green reeds in his hand, which looked like a rough reed flute. Su Fengnian sat on the cobblestone ferry and blew the reed pipe, whimpering faintly. Wang Shihua didn't sit down. Instead, he stood on the riverside and thought that the young lord might be dissatisfied with why he made that bet with Song Yen and questioned his action in Yuzhou province. However, considering that Wang Shihua was half his trusted subordinate, he didn't punish Wang Shihua in the usual officialdom. Su Fengnian stopped playing the reed flute, raised his head, and pointed to the northeast. There's a poor scholar from Beiliang who has been in the capital for 7 years and finally made a name for himself. The year before last, he had already become the daily assistant of the emperor's clothes minister. Last year, he became the physician of the meritorious service department. He assisted the Minister of Personnel Ministry Zhao Yuling and the Crown Minister Yin Mao Chun to preside over the capital assessment. This year, he will participate in the assessment of the local 4th-grade officials in Liang. In the early spring, he and Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan made a private visit to the south. After returning to the capital, they got married. On the wedding night, there were big red candles and a red veil. The woman surnamed Zhao was a noble. This scholar was destined to have a meteoric rise in the future. Even becoming a minister was just around the corner. In the past 7 years, There were only 2 secret letters sent to Baelyang. One was about the crown prince, and the other was about the Zhao emperor's health. This scholar, who had made great contributions to Baelyang, only wrote 2 words at the end of the 2 letters and asked Baelyang to pass the message to one person. Su Fengnian paused for a moment and said flatly, "Don't miss. Don't wait." Wang Shihua sighed. Su Fengnian continued slowly. Before the scholar achieved meteoric success, there was a spy here, Zhao Go, who had been keeping an eye on him for many years. Therefore, even if it was just 2 simple words, the person who missed and waited for still did not know. Wang Shihua asked softly, "That infatuated woman is still waiting?" Su Fengnian nodded and patted the stone at the ferry. Back then, she sent the scholar to the capital to take the imperial examinations here. She did not marry, but if she missed him, she would come here to wait. That was because he had promised her that he would return home to marry her, regardless of whether he could pass the imperial examinations or not. Wang Shihua sighed from the bottom of his heart. Such a scholar, such a woman should have been married. It would not be excessive even if the king of Baelyang personally presided over their marriage. Su Fengnian turned a deaf ear and said, "After the end of last year, the woman stopped waiting at the ferry." Wang Shihua was stunned. Su Fengnian threw the hollow reed into the water. Without turning his head, he stretched out his finger and pointed to a place far away from Wang Shihua. She died in the reed marsh and was buried there. Su Fengnian put his hands into his sleeves. "I came to Yuzhou, to the Yi River, to kill people. You, Wang Shihua, said in your heart that I killed the innocent. I thought that no matter how innocent those nobles were, they were not as innocent as this woman. Moreover, such a woman, such a tragedy, could not be counted in Yuzhou. You scholars keep saying that you wholeheartedly want the world to be peaceful. I, Su Fengnian, feel that world peace is too far away. Since peace is so close, I have to do it well first." Wang Shihua's face was pale. Su Fengnian stood up, shook his sleeves, and bowed to a small grave in the reed marsh. He turned and left, leaving Wang Shihua sitting on the ground dejectedly. Su Fengnian said in a deep voice, "You were lucky to be born as a human, but you did not treat others as human. Since you are not a human, this king will kill anyone he sees in Baelyang." More than 100 Yuzhou men of sacrifice appeared in the reed marsh. They thought that they had seized the opportunity to kill this lone king of vassals on the spot. Su Fengnian put his hands behind his back and, in one breath, dismembered the 100 men. Chapter 1052. Because Yanji County in Yuzhou was close to the border and was a little far from Iha City, it was involved in some disasters. Compared to the bloody rivers in the hinterland of Yuzhou, it could almost be called a paradise. However, there were still some disciples who were implicated and lost their official titles. Therefore, scholars from other places constantly poured into this county with official documents and occupied various positions in the yamen. Most of these scholars who had just entered the Dragon Gate had official seals from the provincial governor's mansion and letters of recommendation from literary bigwigs like Huang Chong. Over the past 10 days, the Yanji County's county governor, Hong Shandong, had been busy receiving and sending people off. It was just the beginning of summer, but he had already drunk many pots of calming fire tea. He was afraid that he would neglect any unknown bigwig who had a backer. Now, it was obvious that Wang Chongwen of New Liang was suppressing his military force. Weren't those people who started a massacre in Yuzhou all martial artists? Hong Shandong didn't dare to put on airs at this critical moment. There were 7 counties in Yanji County, but there was only one upper county. According to the law of Liang, only a county with a yield of 100,000 dan of grain was considered an upper county. In Baelyang, half of the county's grain was already considered a top county. This time, the scholars who entered this county as officials were 1 county magistrate, 3 county deputy ministers, 6 county secretaries, and 1 county lieutenant. Fortunately, they all held positions in the middle and lower counties, so they didn't stab the county governor in the heart. It was human nature for a new official to visit a county magistrate, Hong Shandong, and it was also a rule. However, there was still 1 county secretary and 1 county lieutenant who didn't show up. Perhaps it was because of their scholarly character that they directly went to the local magistrate. Hong Shandong, who was originally a scholar, was too lazy to care about this kind of red tape. He was content to have a muddled peace in his county. Bishan County was a barren county in the middle of nowhere. It only had the air of being the largest county in Yanji County. In addition, the local power was very strong, So the county magistrate here had always been sullen, not to mention the good thing of earning 100,000 dan of silver for 3 years. This time, the officialdom of Yuzhou was greatly shaken. From the top to the bottom of Bishan County, the county magistrate and county lieutenant all ran away without anyone saying anything. It would be best if they could go to other counties. Those who didn't have this ability also took the opportunity to lower their status and go to other places to fish for money. As a result, after the county magistrate, the county deputy minister, the county secretary, and the other officials gathered in the old county office of this county, they all stared at each other in bewilderment. They were all unfamiliar faces. County Magistrate Feng Guan was a scholar from the Shangyin Academy. He had just reached 30 years old. It was said that he was a fine jade material that even Grand Chancellor Wang took a fancy to. In Bailiang today, he naturally became a first-class commodity. County Magistrate Hong accepted this person's greeting gift, but secretly sent an even more valuable gift in return. Deputy County Magistrate Zhuo Jing's reputation was slightly inferior. He was a scholar who had followed the Lu family of Qingzhou into the Qing dynasty. He did not have any scholarly achievements, but since he was able to get in touch with the Lu family, who was a relative of the imperial family, no one dared to look down on him. Commandant Bai Shank liked to wear a personal knife. He was the bold person who did not visit County Chief Hong. He was tall and sturdy, and did not consider himself a scholar. Even when he was in the main hall of the county office, he still looked askance at people. The remaining person was the registrar. His official position was the most mediocre among the top officials in the county. His name was Su Qi. He did not wear a knife, sword, or jade. He was young, but he really had a good appearance. Out of the 4 officials, Feng Guan was arrogant because of his talent and was also the county magistrate. He was neither cold nor warm to everyone. Zhuo Jing tried to befriend Bai Shank, but the latter did not appreciate it and could only settle for the next best thing. He ran over to Registrar Su and called him brother. Finally, his efforts were not wasted. When they had nothing to do, they left the office and went to the streets to drink. Zhuo Jing tried to sound him out several times and found out that this person was a son of a general who had come to the remote countryside to avoid disaster. At first, Zhuo Jing treated him to a banquet, but then he let the young Registrar Su foot the bill. At first, Zhuo Jing was a little nervous. He was afraid that this young son of a general was too arrogant and would come to blows at the slightest disagreement. Later, after drinking more and more, they became more familiar with each other. He was certain that this inexperienced official was very easy to talk to and was willing to suffer losses. However, in his heart, Zhuo Jing looked down on him more and more. He only saw him as a fair-weather friend. It was the general trend for scholars to be in charge of Bailiang's government affairs. Su Qi was just an insignificant son of a general. What kind of future would he have in the future? However, there was one thing about Su Qi that Zhuo Jing liked. When Zhuo Jing was criticizing current affairs, Su Qi did not understand and was more than willing to listen to Zhuo Jing, the county deputy's guidance. Anyway, Bishan County's affairs were not heavy. Magistrate Feng was always eager to do them, and County Magistrate Bai was always elusive. Zhuo Jing and Su Qi had plenty of time to drink and chat. Taking a break from work? It was more like taking a break from work. The main entrance of the county yamen was not long. There were only a few shops, and there was only one restaurant. There were only a few kinds of green ant wine. Zhuo Jing was not used to drinking the cheap green ant wine that burned his throat. Today, he asked for a jug of Jianan spring wine that had just arrived. When he asked for the wine, he deliberately glanced at Su Qi's face. Seeing Su Qi's pained expression and trying to hide it, Master Zhuo held back his laughter. Afterward, he drank in large mouthfuls and felt more at ease. As he drank the good wine to satisfy his craving, Zhuo Jing felt a heroic spirit fill his chest, rushing straight to his teeth. He had only finished 1 cup when Su Qi tactfully reached out to refill his cup. Sir Zhuo picked up the wine cup. He wasn't in a hurry to drink, saying unhurriedly, "Last time I told you about Bai Yan and Tan Tonweng's public rupture, how satisfying it was. Today, I want to properly talk about the aftermath. This Grand Secretary Zhang's control of the Liang Discourse Road has finally come in handy." With a cautious sound, this blade suddenly fell down in the imperial court. Although no one died, it made those who had the qualifications to enter the imperial court lose 2 noble titles, as well as 16 official hats. Su Qi, don't you think it's amazing? Su Qi laughed softly and said, "Amazing. It was indeed an extremely tyrannical counterattack. It doesn't lose to Chen Jibao's plum wine." Zhuo Jing originally wanted to answer his own question, but after being interrupted, he subconsciously wanted to glare. However, he quickly restrained himself. The person sitting in front of him was, after all, an official of the same rank as him. He took a slow sip and brewed his emotions before continuing. "The officials in the court are dejected and anxious. However, this is not important. Soon, there will be a light at the end of the tunnel. That Bai Yan intends to open up the Lotus Seed River to deal with the flood in Guangling." The Minister of Works, who is known for his silent meditation, wrote a letter for the first time, stating the pros and cons in a clear and organized manner. He actually did his best to refute the Grand Secretary. "The way I see it, there are two emperors in this dynasty. No matter how the man and the cat died, they are dead in the end. This purple-beard duke, who still holds the title of Grand Secretary, is also on the verge of collapse." Speaking of this, Zhuo Jing, who was most likely to take over the position of county magistrate, also sighed endlessly. Since he was a scholar, no matter how much he criticized Bai Yan, how could he not yearn for him in his heart? If one didn't reach the martial emperor city, one wouldn't be considered a hero. If one didn't recognize Bai Yan as a scholar, how could he be an official? Zhuo Jing took a sip of wine and clicked his tongue. In the end, he heard a question that spoiled the mood. "Sir Zhuo, Grand Secretary Zhang is too far away from me. I am more curious about the current Zhang Hu." Zhuo Jing couldn't help but think, "Who do you think you are, Su Qi? Forget about Bai Yan. Even Great Peace City is thousands of miles away from you. As for Zhang Hu, how much closer can you be?" However, despite his disdain, Zhuo Jing still had a smile on his face after drinking the good wine that Su Qi had treated him to. He slowly said, "Zhang Hu? I have heard of it. Although I didn't pay much attention to it, since you asked, there is no harm in telling you a few words. It just so happens that the situation in the court has changed. The 3 reviews of the world have spread from Guangling Taoism. Let's not talk about the reviews of generals. They are all expected figures. Only this court's Yin Mao Chun and Beimang's Dong Zhuo have some new ideas. Just the review you asked about is really a big deal that hasn't been seen in 100 years. From 10 people to 15. Su Qi laughed and said, "With so many people, isn't it a bit worthless?" Zhuo Jing sneered and said, "Worthless? This time, it's more valuable than the previous reviews. In the past, when there were 10 people in Liang, as well as when Bei Mang overstepped its authority and published a review, they didn't include people from the 3 religions. They didn't dare touch places like Martial Emperor City and the Wu family's sword tomb. This time the 15 people in the review are the real top masters in the world." Su Qi lowered his head and drank a mouthful of wine. Then, he squinted his eyes and smiled. Zhuo Jing glanced at the young registrar across the table. The ordinary-looking deputy left district magistrate couldn't help but feel a little resentful. This general's son was born with an appearance that could easily abduct women. At some point, the young owner of the restaurant also came over. He didn't know that he had brought a pot of green ant wine, which couldn't be sold for more than a few copper coins. He just sat there and didn't drink. Zhuo Jing was annoyed. He didn't want to waste his saliva, but he couldn't endure the desire in the shabby young owner's eyes. The corner of Zhuo Jing's mouth twitched. When he saw Su Qi ask for a pot of Jiannan Chun wine from the shopkeeper, he smiled and said, "Old monster Wang Xianji, is still the undisputed #1 in the world. No one can shake his position. Even the peach blossom sword god, Dong Tai, who returned from a visit to immortality and overturned the South Sea with his sword, can only obediently accept the 2nd place." The young owner of the restaurant with thick eyebrows and big eyes was shocked and said loudly, "What's going on? Tuoba Bodhisattva has become the 3rd place?" Chapter 1053. Master Zhuo was too lazy to pay attention to this ignorant frog at the bottom of the well. He said slowly, "What's so strange about that? Tuoba Bodhisattva of Bei Mang was pushed to the 3rd place by Dong Tai. The top 3 of the peak of martial arts have changed, but they are still the same 3. After talking about the 3 land immortals, I'll talk about the last 5 people. The people who made the comments probably had some reservations. The leaders of Buddhism in the 3 sects were not in the top 10. For example, the white-robed monk of the 2 Zen temple who had been sealed in the mountain, Li Xiaoxin, Northern Mang's national advisor, Qilin immortal Yuan Qingshan, and the new leader of Wudong Li Yufu, were all outside the top 10. Along with Deng Mao of Broken Spear and Su Yambing of Northern Liang, they occupied these 5 positions. If it was 10 years ago, these 5 people would be in the top 5. The young owner of the restaurant said happily, "Our Bailiang is amazing. Both Leader Li and General Su are on the list. I'm in a good mood today. I'll treat you to a drink later. It's definitely the best green ant wine. You can't find a place to sell it in Bishan County. Master Zhua, tell me, who are the 7 heroes?" Zhuajing wanted to make fun of him. He said mischievously, "Give me the wine first. Otherwise, there's no need to talk." The young owner said impatiently, "What's the hurry? I'll definitely treat you to 2 pots of green ant wine later. Do you think I have the guts to cheat you?" Su Qi opened the 2nd bottle of Sword South Spring wine. After Zhuajing filled his cup to the brim, he didn't want to bicker with a country bumpkin. He downed half a cup and said with a satisfied expression, "The 4th is Chao Chongqing, the Confucian sage of West Chu. The 5th is Luo Yang, the devil of Zhulu Mountain. The 8th is Hong Jingyan, Gung Luozi. The 9th is Gu Jiantang, the pillar of the state. The 10th is Lustrous King Sword Master, the current master of the Wu family sword tomb." The young owner was stunned. He counted with his fingers and asked in confusion, "Where are the 6th and 7th? Deputy District Magistrate, could it be that you drank it all away?" Zhuajing was about to reach out with his chopsticks to pick up a peanut from the small porcelain plate and pretended to hit the fool. He rolled his eyes and said, "The 7th is the new king of Shu who came out of Bailiang, Chen Jibao." The young man chuckled and said, "What do you mean by your Bailiang? County deputy, you must be drunk. It's our Bailiang." Zhuajing was a little frightened. Most of the tipsy feeling left him, but he quickly regained his composure and said with a smile, "As for the 6th, it's our king of Bailiang." The young man opened his mouth and eyes wide. Zhuajing glanced at him from the corner of his eyes. He did not hide the sarcasm on his face. "You don't believe me? Pei Ju, do you not dare to believe it, or do you not want to believe it?" The young man with the surname Pei grinned and said, "That's great news. I believe you, I believe you. If you don't believe me, I'll have the same surname as you, Deputy District Magistrate Zhua." Zhuajing could not help but show off his knowledge. He sneered and said, "The surname Pei was a big surname 20 years ago, but now it's not even worth a fart. It's more than 60 times worse than my surname Zhua in this dynasty." Pei Ju nodded his head vigorously like a chicken pecking on rice. Yes. The surname Pei is a disgrace. No matter where I go, I won't be welcomed. Right now, I can't wait to find a well-bred young lady and marry into her family." Su Qi sighed and said, "The 6th. It seems that Huang Sanjiao is being merciful." Zhuajing was confused and asked, "What did you say?" Su Qi shook his head and said with a smile, "I just think that no matter what the ranking is, it's already very scary to be on the martial arts ranking list." Pei Ju faced the arrogant deputy district magistrate and the reverence that some commoners should have for their parents. As for Su Qi, who was polite to everyone, he was used to climbing up the ladder. These days, when they occasionally interacted with each other, he had always been carefree and unscrupulous. He grabbed a handful of peanuts and put them in his mouth. He said vaguely, "It's not just scaring people. If I see one, I'll be scared out of my wits. If I'm not scared to death, I'll beg them to take me in as their disciple. If I'm lucky enough to learn a few moves, I'll go out in Jianghu and fight anyone. If I can't beat them, I can ask for my master's support. Who would dare to bully me? Wouldn't they be in a hurry to be reincarnated?" Su Qi wanted to say something but stopped. Finally, he could not help but say, "If you have such thoughts, you won't be able to practice the sword and become a master." Pei Ju rolled his eyes and said unhappily, "I don't practice the sword either. Look, among the top 3 in the world, there's only one who practices the sword. Including the 15 masters, there's only that old guy Wu Jiajian who practices the sword. He's still at the bottom of the top 10. Su Qi smiled and said, "That's true." Pei Ju's eyes suddenly lit up. He stared at the knowledgeable district magistrate and asked impatiently, "What about the Rouge ranking? Who are the beauties?" Zhuajing was a man after all. He smiled and took a sip of wine. After a while he said, "The Rouge ranking hasn't changed much. It's just that the Princess Jing and Pei Nanwei, who died for love, is missing. There's an additional West Chu's fallen princess, Jiang Si. Pei Ju thought for a while and said, I know this one. She can ride a sword through the 18 gates of the imperial city. Who would dare to marry her in the future? What about our Wulin chief, Mount Huishan Zi? Didn't they say that she's also a beauty who brings disaster to the country? Zhuo Jing laughed in a low voice and said, No one dares to marry the West Chu princess, but no one dares to touch the mistress of Great Meadow? You have to understand that although Shen Yuan Qingfeng wasn't ranked among the 15, he was singled out along with Nangong Push. He said that the former was only one level away and the latter was only one level away. They both have the potential to reach the top of the Wulin world as women. It's just a matter of who's a step faster. Whoever's a step slower will fall behind and it'll be difficult for them to stand side by side. In my opinion, this old fox who wrote the ranking is also full of evil tricks. He wants nothing more than for the two beauties to fight. Little brat of the Pei family, let me ask you, let's not talk about those unattainable people. Let's talk about how you know two beautiful ladies on the street, but you can't eat them. Would you be happy to see them fight on the street? Pei Ju only cared about laughing. The answer was self-evident. Since there was free wine to drink, Zhuo Jing talked more. Afterwards, he told the two ignorant young men about many new things in Jianghu. For example, Dongyue Sword Pool's Song Yanqing died for no reason, and Shishan Spring Cottage's swordsmanship master Xielingzhen also died mysteriously. These sects had lost their pillars and their status in Jianghu plummeted. They were no longer at the top of the Jianghu world. They were far behind the Wu family's sword tomb in Longhu Mountain, and could only be ranked among the top 10 sects with many new rising sections. Bai Liang was indeed the big winner this time. In this evaluation of Liang being Liang, Bai Mang being Bai Mang, there was another fish dragon gang that no one had heard of before. Although they were ranked last, so what if they were ranked 10th? When they went out and announced their name, they would always claim that the fish dragon gang was one of the top 10 sects in Liang. They wouldn't rashly say that they were ranked 10th. When the county deputy was talking about this, Pei Ju was already thinking about whether he should go to Lingzhou to join the fish dragon gang. After chatting for a while, Pei Ju slapped his thigh and asked, Mr. Zhua, why isn't that big devil cat on the list? Why is he ranked lower than others? He can't even get into the top 15? Zhuo Jing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He pointed at the young man who lived in a corner and could only look at the sky from the bottom of a well. Are you stupid? Bao Shuqi, the county magistrate of Bishan, laughed it off. Pei Ju suddenly covered his stomach and said that he was going to the toilet. Then he disappeared. After drinking the last cup of South Blade spring wine, Mr. Zhuo suddenly realized that this silly boy was not really stupid. He was just playing tricks to avoid the 2 pots of green ant wine that they had agreed on. Zhuo Jing smiled and got up to leave the table. Su Qi said that he wanted to stay for a while, so the county deputy walked out of the restaurant alone and muttered, Stupid is stupid. The restaurant is here, where can he go? He can hide for a while, but he can't hide forever. I'm a 6th grade county deputy. Not to mention drinking 2 pots of your wine, I can even take half of your restaurant. After Zhuo Jing left the restaurant, the young man immediately ran back to the table and sat down. He said with a smile, Su Qi, don't you think this guy is stupid? He doesn't even understand the principle of being fickle. He has studied so much for nothing. Su Qi asked with a smile, Is there any other principle to be particular about being fickle? Pei Ju crossed his legs and picked up the bottle of South Blade spring wine. He raised his head and drank a few drops of wine from the bottom of the bottle. He wiped his mouth and said, You must have studied less than me. A monkey performer gives a monkey 3 acorns in the morning and 4 acorns in the evening. If the monkey doesn't agree, the performer will say 4 acorns in the morning and 3 acorns in the evening. When I was young, I heard this joke in other people's ears and thought that the monkey was really smart. Wouldn't it be better to get 1 more acorns in the morning than anything else? Even if it could get 3 more acorns in the evening, it would be better to get it early. Besides, in our world, who doesn't talk nonsense when doing business? That's why I said that the monkey is smart, but the county deputy is stupid. I don't know how he became the county deputy. In my opinion, I'd rather be the county deputy. Su Qi looked out of the window and said calmly, You're right. But in fact, sometimes you don't have to be so smart. Pei Ju spat and sneered, Su Qi, what you said is meaningless. If you don't be smart, how can you be successful? The wild dogs on the street know how to bite the poor beggars. Do you think it dares to bite me or the county deputy? Su Chi walked out of the restaurant without saying anything. Walking on the street where there were few pedestrians, he raised his head and let the sunlight dazzle his eyes. He was indifferent. Pei Ju leaned against the window and looked at the figure that was walking away. He had always been jealous of the young owner of the restaurant who was dressed in thin clothes, had good looks, and was an official. He pouted and muttered, "What's the use of pretending to be a dog? Do you think you're worthy of being reasonable with me?" Su Chi walked alone. "Hey, Vancouver. Your brother is already the 6th in the world in name. If one day in the future, I'm still alive and you're still alive, then, I'll take the initiative and add in the share that you don't want. It's not too much for the two of us to be the first in the world, right?" Chapter 1054. Translator, Transin Editor. Transin Su Chi didn't live in the back hall of the county office. County Magistrate Feng Guan had brought many books and servants with him, so they occupied many rooms. County Magistrate Bai Shank had also cleared out an extra room for practicing martial arts. He didn't stand on ceremony with anyone. If anyone was dissatisfied, they could come and ask for his saber. Therefore, Su Chi, as the registrar official, sensibly bought a small house outside the county office. It was only a few minutes away from the county office. The alley was secluded and deep. In the courtyard, there was a small well with fresh green grapevines. It was a quiet and pleasant place. When Su Chi returned to his house, a little girl with a golden hairpin on her head was lying on the mouth of the well. She didn't care if this posture was elegant or not. Su Fengnian took off his civil official uniform with a 6th-rank official patch and moved a small stool to sit beside the well. Originally, he didn't have the fortune to spend his days leisurely like this. However, after his second sister learned of his current situation, she would rather tire herself and insisted that her younger brother not touch the mountainous pile of documents and government affairs for the time being. It should be known that these documents could immediately become a mountain again after being moved away. However, she said that it was the work of the servants and the work of the superior and the work of the superior. Therefore, he took it as giving him the last half a year of leisure. Logically speaking, Su Chi had never won against her. All he could do was wait patiently for the next spring. At that time, even if he wanted to slack off, his second sister would pull him by the ear and bring him to the desk. In Bishan County of Yenji Commandery, this moderately sized registrar official was, of course, Su Chi, the son of a general. He had used this alias in Beimang and Liangjianghu. However, after the one-year mourning period ended and he put on the clothes that the Golden Silk Weaving Bureau spent a lot of manpower and money to make, it was time for him to leave this place in Yuzhou. In Bishan County, other than a secret letter from home every half a day, no one would disturb his peace and quiet. Therefore, things like martial arts evaluations, rouge evaluations, generals evaluations, and so on could only be heard from deputy county magistrates Wu Jing. His meager salary as the county magistrate was mostly spent on Zhuo Jing's drinking. Without a doubt, Huang Sonjia had once again deliberately stirred up a demonic wind. Among them, Mount Longhu was the biggest loser. A father and son Taoist masters had ascended together. It was an unprecedented grand occasion, but it seemed to have emptied all of the Taoist ancestral court's assets. This time, no one had made it onto the rankings. But Li Yufu of Wudong, who had not been heard of until now, had made it onto the rankings and stood shoulder to shoulder with Yuan Qingshan and Li Xiaoxin. Mount Wudong's status would definitely rise. And with the sudden appearance of Su Yanbing, who was ranked 6th in the world, Bai Liang was the biggest winner. He leaned against the rattan frame and muttered to himself, 10 times I was in a trance. Looking down from a high vantage point, I've seen many places. I've also seen the gathering and dispersing of fate. It's said that a place's environment nurtures a place's people. Within the limitations of this place's environment, people's words and actions permeate each other. Therefore, this place's environment is different from that of another place's environment. The people of the two places write different articles. To exaggerate, with the Guangling River as the boundary between the north and the south, the people of the south and the people of the north are completely different. When I'm in a trance, I look at the big, and when I'm back, I look at the small. Now when I look at the new Bai Liang, Zhuo Jing, and the old Pei Ju, I look at their words and actions. In the end, their fates are mixed up and they all merge into Bai Liang's fate. Now, Bai Liang has Mount Wudong, a place of fate. But we have to wait until Li Yufu returns. After Jiang Ni and the old man with the sheepskin fur coat left, Mount Qingliang was replaced by the androgynous white fox's face and Huyen Guanyin. But whether these people are here or not, they follow the 4 words: the heavens are clear. They can't be forced. Many of my old friends have really become dead. There are also some who will become ancient people one day. For example, Wang Xiaoping, who follows Lu Songtao, and Sui Xiegu, who for some reason still hasn't entered the martial arts rankings. There are also Miss Li Zi and the North and South monks, whose whereabouts are unknown. But speaking of which, most of the people who are related to me don't have good endings. He, who had been listening to Su Fengyan's nagging, raised her head and adjusted the slightly tilted golden hairpin. She said calmly, "I should have died more than 10 years ago." Su Fengyan was amused. He asked curiously, "Since I'm your savior, why did you kill me? You showed mercy a few times, but there were also times when you really wanted to kill me." The young girl sat on the mouth of the well and looked at him. She blinked. "Old Huang said that you lived so miserably. Dying in my hands is better than dying in someone else's hands. I think." Su Fengyan said helplessly, "You think it makes sense?" The young girl chuckled a few times. She was obviously happy. She suddenly seemed to have remembered something and disappeared in a flash. She left as soon as she said so, leaving Su Fengyan all alone in his room. Su Fengyan didn't know where she went, but he felt that she wouldn't show up for a while. Su Fengyan sighed and sat on the small bench in a daze. These days, he mostly went to the county yamen for roll call. After that, he didn't have anything to do. There were many things waiting to be done in Bishan County due to the replacement of the old and the new. It should have been the most difficult time in the county yamen, but the county magistrate Feng Guan was incomparably powerful and monopolized the power. Zhua Jing had been fighting openly and secretly for power several times, but he had lost. He had nothing to do. It seemed that he wanted to seek some support from his backer. For the time being, he chose to rest and lie low, waiting to see how long Feng Guan could run rampant. Bai Shangguan's ambition didn't lie in one county or one county. He often went to the passes in Yanji County to relax and make friends with the commandant who had real power in Bailiang. In the present Bailiang County, not to mention the 14 new commandants, any commandant who held the commander's seal was already a very popular person. There were 2 reasons why Su Fengyan chose Bishan County as his base. First, the aftermath of the Yuzhou incident was still lingering. He had to keep an eye on the new provincial governor Hu Kuei and the Yuzhou general Huang Fujin to see if they could play the role of good cop. Second, Yanji County was close to the border. Su Fengyan was greatly disappointed by the number of soldiers in Yuzhou, and he didn't have much confidence in the Yuzhou border army. He wanted to go to the border to take a look when he had time. Third, he wanted to personally experience the new atmosphere in Bailiang's officialdom. He could see the big picture from a small clue. It was more accurate and comprehensive than hearsay or even spies' secret reports. Just like the current situation, the internal friction between Feng Guan and Zhua Jing in Bishan County, and the discord between the county magistrate and the county magistrate had already made Su Fengyan worried. Su Fengyan looked at the sky and got up to go to the kitchen. He helplessly found that the rice jar was already empty. Although he was now no different from a Taoist priest in terms of fasting, and his mysterious realm was far beyond that. Since ancient times, sages and virtuous men had always talked about cultivating Taoism and not immortality. Besides, in order to achieve immortality, what good would it do to cultivate oneself to an inhuman state before becoming an immortal? During this period of time, Su Fengyan didn't forget to eat, drink, or sleep. He went to the table and took a bag of silver, intending to go out and buy a bag of rice. Perhaps it was because Bishan County was barren and unruly. The local tyrannical families didn't treat these newly appointed officials well. The families headed by the Zhu family even closed their doors and refused to see any guests. They were determined to draw a clear line between themselves and these new officials. Chapter 1055. Just as Su Fengyan was about to leave, a young man rushed into the small courtyard, carrying a bag of rice on his shoulder. Su Fengyan did not stand on ceremony with him, accepting the bag of rice with a smile and pouring it into the rice vat. The young man beside him was surnamed Zhu, and his name was Zhengli. They had gotten to know each other through drinking. He was a local born and raised in Bishan County, and he claimed to be a poor son of a small family that had been rejected by a wealthy family in Yanji County. How could Su Fengyan not have guessed that he was a true descendant of the Zhu family? However, since Zhu Zhengli was unwilling to admit it, he did not expose him. Zhu Zhengli had a free and easy temperament, and was one of the few righteous sons of a large family. It was probably because of his Baoyang's knight-errant nature that he did not mix well with the other sons in Bishan County. Instead, there were many disputes. A few years ago, because of an incident that implicated his family, he had gotten into a heated argument with the previous county magistrate. One must know that the county magistrate was not an official. The county magistrate's position was not high, but it was the local emperor under the provincial governor. To be able to sit in this position, one must have a background that was not to be underestimated, and one must also have an extraordinary knowledge of officialdom. It was easy for him to cause the downfall of the commoners. Zhu Zhengli dared to provoke the county magistrate because he himself did not understand the ways of the world. Moreover, the Zhu family in Bishan County did indeed have a deep foundation. If the head of the Zhu family really spoke, not only the county magistrate, even the governor of Yanji County, Hong Shandong, would have to obediently keep quiet. It was only because the Zhu family had retired in recent years that the monkeys in Bishan County were able to become kings. Zhu Zhengli was a guy who liked to nag. At this time, he was laughing at how Su Qi's position as a registrar was too shabby. He couldn't get anything out of it, and it would be hard for him to not be filthy rich. He even said that Su Qi's family must have used up all their savings to donate such a lousy position. Otherwise, how could he have fallen to such a miserable state without food? Su Fengnian didn't refute him. He just smiled and reminded this guy not to expose others' shortcomings in front of a dwarf. Zhu Zhengli laughed loudly, but didn't continue to nag about Su Qi's dire situation. Su Fengnian took out a pot of green ant wine. The two of them sat under the grape trellis, each holding a large white porcelain bowl. The sun in Baoyang was particularly vicious. Summer had just begun, but it was already as unbearably hot as Jiangnan. The good thing about it was that as long as they stayed in the shade, the wind would cool them down. With a bowl of green ant wine for each of them, the two of them were even more carefree than immortals. Su Fengnian drank a mouthful of wine, squinted his eyes and smiled drunkenly. He asked, "Today, there are real shortages everywhere in Yuzhou. Why don't you tell your elders to find a loophole? Make up your mind and take out a few hundred taels of silver to find a backdoor. Then, find a famous person with a bit of reputation and ask for a recommendation letter. Even if I don't become a county registrar, it won't be difficult for me to get an official position. In the future, I won't be able to make a name for myself in Baoyang's underworld. It's even more impossible in the future. It's better to be a civil official." Zhu Zhengli shook his head like a rattledrum. What's so good about being an official? It's not good to ride on the heads of ordinary people. Not to mention that I came from a poor family. Even if I did have money, I wouldn't waste it. If I really want to be an official, it's better to join the army at the border. It's more comfortable to rely on one's own ability to earn real military merits. Su Fengnian joked, "With your mediocre skills, it's fine if you fight in an ordinary battle. Not to mention encountering crows. Even if you run into the second-rate cavalry of Bei Meng, it's no different from throwing your life away. No matter how boring it is to be an official, is it interesting to be a dead man?" Zhu Zhengli sighed and rubbed his chin. "That's why my grandmother doesn't want me to join the army. She said that she'd rather have me eat and wait for death in Bishan County than to see her own child die. She also said that if I dared to sneak out of Yanji County, she'd find someone to break one of my legs. Heh, my grandmother always keeps her word. Everyone in my family is afraid of her, like a mouse in front of a cat. I wasn't afraid when I was young, but I became more and more afraid when I grew up." Su Fengnian mischievously asked, "How's your little sister, who fell in love with county magistrate by at first sight?" Zhu Zhengli felt a toothache when he heard this. With a bitter face he said, "I'm puzzled. You have the same rank as that embroidered pillow by Shank, and you're even more handsome than that pretty boy. It's strange, my little sister doesn't like you and insists on getting close to that guy surnamed Bai. She doesn't even have the modesty that a woman should have. That's fine, but there's an old saying that a man chasing a woman is separated by a mountain, and a woman chasing a man is separated by a layer of gauze. I don't think that guy surnamed Bai gives my little sister any face. That's why I'm so worried. And if that scowling guy really becomes my brother-in-law, I'll definitely." "Su Qi, what's that saying again?" Su Fengnian laughed. "Chickens and dogs hear each other's voices, but they don't interact with each other for the rest of their lives." Zhu Zhengli slapped Registrar Su's shoulder and didn't forget to wipe the wine off his hand. He laughed. Su Qi, no wonder you can become our Bishan County's registrar. You've studied for a few days. I can't do that. Once I touch a book, I faint and want to sleep. If I were to practice martial arts, I wouldn't have a problem even if I didn't rest for a few days and nights. But my grandmother wouldn't let me practice martial arts no matter what. Sigh, brother, I'm just a waste of my talent. Su Fengnian smiled and said bluntly, your talent is average and can't be much better. I'm only telling you the truth because we're friends. Zhu Zhengli didn't get angry. He glared at him and said, when Wang Xianji first started out in the martial arts world, the seniors in the martial arts world said that her talent was average. Besides, I don't have to be a world-shaking hero to practice martial arts. It's fine if I can beat up a few bullies in the village. Su Fengnian nodded. Zhu Zhengli finished a bowl of wine and shook the wine pot. There was about half a bowl left. He put it down and said that he had snuck out from home to get some fresh air. He still had to go back and deal with the books of the saints. If his grandmother found out, he would be crippled the next time they met. Su Fengnian didn't send him off. He laughed. Remember to bring wine the next time you visit. Zhu Zhengli, who had jogged away, turned around and raised his middle finger. Su Fengnian smiled and poured himself another half bowl of wine. He sat alone under the grape trellis. The breeze caressed his face and he was in a good mood. Before he finished drinking the green ant in his bowl, he put the bowl on the bamboo chair and stood up to welcome the guest. A white-haired old woman slowly walked into the courtyard with a walking stick. She was stunned when she saw Su Fengnian. She sat down in front of Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian only sat down after she sat down. The old woman was the head of the Zhu family in Bishan County. The Zhu family had 4 generations. In the previous 3 generations, there were more females than males. Zhu Zhengli was the only child in his generation. According to the family tree in the ancestral shrine, there should be 6 or 7 uncles. However, none of them were alive today. It was the same for the previous generation. The old woman was the eldest daughter-in-law of the Zhu family. As time passed, she became the true backbone of the Zhu family in Bishan County. She was considered a virtuous and respectable mistress in the entire Yanji County. It was said that when the Su family took over Bailiang, General Su Shao and Princess Consort Wu Su had stayed in the Zhu family. Just based on this, who would dare to belittle the Zhu family in Yuzhou, let alone Yanji County? Moreover, the 12 men of the Zhu family of 2 generations had all died at the border in the past 20 years. The old woman was slightly lost in thought. She looked at Su Fengnian and said softly, "You really look like him." Su Fengnian wanted to say something but stopped. The old woman waved her hand. She leaned on her walking stick with both hands and looked at the door of the courtyard. She said, "At first, I wanted to see the Registrar General who could make my grandson call him brother. After seeing him, I understood. Back then, when the head of the Zhu family met the general, it was more or less the same situation. The general didn't put on airs. My husband wanted nothing more than to repay him with his life. He was clumsy and didn't say much, but he did." Su Fengnian said in a low voice, "This old man, please don't worry. I definitely won't let Zhu Zhengli follow in his ancestors' footsteps. This time, I took root in Bishan County and didn't even dare to visit the Zhu family. It was a coincidence that I met Zhu Zhengli. In the future when I leave, it's likely that we won't meet again. I hope this old man won't worry." The old woman grunted and didn't say anything else. The old woman sat quietly for the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. She slowly stood up. Su Fengnian stood up and walked her to the door. The old woman suddenly asked, "Can you really defend it?" Su Fengnian replied calmly, "If we can't, I'll have to trouble this old man to tell Zhu Zhengli that Su Qi ran to the Central Plains to become an official." The old woman reached out her trembling hand and touched Su Fengnian's head. The old woman slowly walked towards the carriage that was parked at the corner of the alley. Before she got on the carriage, she saw the young man at the door silently watching her leave. She murmured, "So similar." Chapter 1056. The capital of Yanji County was close to Qingan County. Su Fengnian, as the county clerk, didn't visit Governor Hong Shandong back then. This time, he rushed to the capital because he had other plans. Now, he didn't even have a coachman by his side. Su Yanbing went to Gourd Mouth of Yuzhou to serve as one of the 8 captains of Bailiang's border. His main purpose was to intimidate the important people in the border army who were related to Yozhou's general family. Su Yanbing was one of the 15 people in the new martial arts evaluation. Just this point alone was enough to make people afraid. Moreover, he was once Su Zhao's trusted retainer. In the spring and autumn period, it was common for a ruler to bestow a surname to his trusted subordinates, especially those who were born in the wilderness. However, there were only a few people on Su Zhao's side. Lu Yanbing was one of them. It was said that a new ruler brings in new subordinates. Su Yanbing had been trusted by the king of Bailiang for 2 dynasties. In the eyes of outsiders, even the infantry commander Yen Wenluan had to give him some face. Now that the new King Liang, who was ranked 6th in the world, was said to be able to take on 2,000 cavalry, who would protect him? When Su Fengnian led his horse into the city, he used Su Qi's identity and had an official's record. Naturally, he was unimpeded. When Su Fengnian entered the capital, he saw many young men and women in luxurious clothes. They all got off their horses and walked through the city gate. Even after passing through the city gate and getting back on their horses, they didn't dare to gallop wildly. They were no longer as arrogant and unrestrained as before. Moreover, no one dared to carry a Bailiang saber. It was probably because the smell of blood in Yuzhou had yet to disperse. Half of the northern Liang's heroic image had been forcefully stripped away. After Su Fengnian entered the city, he continued to lead his horse slowly toward a rare house with mountains and water. In Bailiang, one only needed to look at the amount of water, the number of wells, and the amount of winter snow stored in the cellar. It was even more impressive to be able to be near a lake. As for Mount Qingliang, since the family head surname was Su, it didn't need to be said. Within Yanji County, Hu Bai was a spy. He was still very young, but his senior spy had placed high hopes on him as early as his youth. It wasn't common for a spy to become an official in Bailiang, but logically speaking, it shouldn't be difficult. Hu Bai was very handsome. He didn't read much, but he was born with a scholarly air. The turtle spy in Yanji County had once been his master's subordinate, so he had taken care of Hu Bai in silence. As a result, he had assigned him a job that didn't require much effort, but was very pleasing and beneficial to his future. At first, when Hu Bai heard that he was going to be a woman's spy, he wasn't very happy. He only listened to orders, as that was the duty of a spy. However, when Hu Bai became the young and rich shopkeeper of the silk shop on this street and saw the woman with his own eyes, he didn't have any complaints. Hu Bai had seen many beautiful women. Some were as flirtatious as peonies, some were as pure as white lotuses. He had even tasted the flavor of the courtesan of a large brothel. His state of mind was always as tranquil as an ancient well, but he had never seen such a soul-stirring woman. Moreover, there was something else besides her appearance that made it even more difficult for Hu Bai to let go of. Hu Bai followed his duty and didn't dare take a single step past the minefield. He didn't take the initiative to meet her. She rarely showed her face on the street. From the time she appeared in the silk shop until she disappeared, it was only a door's distance away. Hu Bai didn't even raise his head. He could only watch her out of the corner of his eye. Occasionally, he would lie on the roof in the middle of the night and drink wine. He would glance at the pitch-black courtyard not far away and know that she lived there. Hu Bai didn't probe into her background. He only wanted to be able to guard her like this, neither near nor far. One day at a time, and it would be best if he could spend a lifetime with her. He only knew that the woman's surname was Pei and that she lived in seclusion. She had never had a social interaction with the officials and nobles of Yanji County. Her temperament was always cold and cheerless. Even though this unavoidably gave people a feeling of lethargy, it was still breathtaking. There were many manners of influential people in Yanji County nearby, and it wasn't that there weren't people with a keen sense of smell who would act upon hearing the news. On a dark and windy night, Hu Bai had personally knocked out more than 10 people, including their master and servants. The military chancellor, who was as fat as a pig, was choked by Hu Bai's neck, lifted a foot off the ground, and viciously smashed his head against the wall of the alley, causing him to faint on the spot. That night, when County Governor Hong Dong heard about this matter, he got out of bed in a hurry and flew into a rage. He actually mobilized a large force and quickly mobilized 30 armored soldiers armed with crossbows to drag away those fellows. The next day, not only did the military chancellor lose his official position, his entire family was expelled from the county city. After that, no one dared to fight anymore. There were still people who wanted to fight to win a smile from the beauty, but they never saw that door open. Later on, it was unknown what the county governor said, But the loafers in the noble families who liked to pretend to be cultured disappeared overnight. That alley returned to its original tranquility without a trace of smoke and fire. Today, Hu Bai was skillfully dealing with the wealthy women in gold and silver, earning the best money in the world. Between transactions, it was unknown who was taking advantage of who. He was teasing two women who were like wolves and tigers when he suddenly caught a glimpse of someone leading a horse past the door. In the blink of an eye, he sized up that person from head to toe, not even missing the quality of the horse and the material of the saddle. Not sensing anything strange, Hu Bai planned to withdraw his gaze. Unexpectedly, that person, intentionally or otherwise, turned his head to look inside the shop and happened to meet Hu Bai's gaze. The two of them almost smiled at the same time. Hu Bai waited for that person to ride past and disappear from his sight before he frowned. However, when he thought about how there were many hidden guards on this street and how there was no lack of experts who were more skilled in martial arts than him, he didn't worry unnecessarily. The corners of his mouth curled up, thinking that the young master's appearance was extremely pleasing to the eye. In Yenji County, which was full of beautiful women but sloppy men, it was indeed rare to see such a person. When the women in the shop saw the smile on Hu Bai's face, they were even more willing to spend a lot of money. However, when they held the satin material, the strength of their palms that brushed against the back of Hu Bai's arm quietly increased. After Pei Nanwei moved into this courtyard, she left behind two diligent young maidservants to serve her, but they couldn't be considered intimate. She would only joke with them when she was in a good mood. These were all teasing words from an experienced woman. She would ask them if they had someone they liked or if they needed her to be a matchmaker. The maidservants would always blush and mumble, not knowing how to answer. After laughing, Pei Nanwei would turn around and forget about it. She didn't really want to be a matchmaker. Over time, the two maidservants roughly understood the temperament of the mistress of the courtyard. At first, they thought that she was a concubine kept in a golden house by some official in Yenji County. Later, they didn't see any men enter the courtyard, so they didn't have this conjecture. She was such a great beauty that even they couldn't take their eyes off of. If someone really took a fancy to her and raised her here, how could he bear to throw her away and not come back to pamper and dote on her for a few months? Today, maidservant Zhu Hai heard a series of tireless knocks on the door. At first, she didn't want to pay attention to it, thinking that it was an ignorant fellow who would soon be dragged away like a dead dog. But after half a cup of tea, the knocks didn't stop. Zhu Hai was puzzled. Was there really such a hero in the county capital who didn't fear death? She hesitated for a moment, thinking that since her mistress was in the backyard and couldn't hear anything, she might as well go and take a look to see who was so reckless. When she opened the door, she was immediately stunned. Oh, it was a handsome guy, so handsome that he looked like a scholar from the novel Gifted Scholar and Beautiful Woman. Moreover, after he opened the door, he smiled at the maidservant Zhu Hai across the threshold. His smile made Zhu Hai's heart beat like a deer. She only felt that he was gentler and more handsome than shopkeeper Hu from the neighboring silk shop. Su Fengnian gently said, "My name is Su Qi. I am the prefect of Bishan County. Your mistress Pei knows me. May I trouble you to inform her?" The maidservant was in a difficult position. She knew about Bishan County, and she also knew the importance of a prefect. But if this person said that he knew her mistress, she wouldn't believe it even if she was beaten to death. "Young Master Su, no matter how handsome you are, it's not a reason for you to swagger into the courtyard." She didn't dare to disturb Mistress Pei because of this. If everyone had to report their name, this courtyard would have long been trampled over by the group of lechers from Yenji County. Even the limestone bricks on the ground of the alley would have to be replaced. Zhu Hai's face was full of suspicion and doubt. She was unwilling to move, so she just stared at him, unwilling to turn around. Su Fengnian was also a bit helpless against this dutiful maidservant. After thinking, he said, "Prefectural Governor Hong Shandong sent me here. If you inform Mistress Pei and she still refuses to see guests, you can hit me with a broom. Is that all right?" Chapter 1057. In Yenji County, Hong Shandong was already the highest-ranking official. To be able to work in this courtyard, the servant girl, Zhu Hai, also knew the severity of the situation. After thinking for a moment, she said earnestly, "I'll go and inform the young lady. I won't close the courtyard door, but you're not allowed to walk into the courtyard without permission." Su Fengnian nodded. The servant girl turned to leave, half believing and half doubting. She didn't forget to turn her head to see if the young man was really being obedient. Seeing that he didn't move at all, She quickened her steps and boldly went to the rear courtyard to inform the young lady. Su Fengnian sat on the threshold, his back to the courtyard. He looked at the horse on the street that couldn't be considered a good horse, but it wasn't a bad one either. As for the few pairs of cold eyes hidden in the shadows, Su Fengnian could easily and clearly feel their heartbeats. Su Fengnian was somewhat moved by their strict adherence to their duties. When outsiders mentioned Bailiang, their first impression would definitely be of the invincible cavalry and the White Horse Scouts. However, they weren't familiar with the Bailiang spies and death soldiers that Chu Lushan had single-handedly created. In fact, over the years, there hadn't been many battles between the two armies on the battlefield. However, the exchange of lives between Bailiang and Baimang's spiderweb and Liang's Zhao Go had never stopped. Su Fengnian came to his senses and turned his head to look. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The servant girl actually carried a broom and angrily ran over. She wouldn't stop until she kicked him out of the door. He didn't need to guess to know that the woman, Pei Nanwei, had set a trap for him. Su Fengnian stood up and watched the servant girl use the broom to use the long-lost, dog-beating stick technique, in Jianghu. He quickly left the courtyard and retreated to the bottom of the steps. He laughed angrily at the courtyard door and said, "The one surnamed Pei, you win." The maidservant stood at the door angrily and waved the broom. She suddenly turned her head and saw her miss standing on the steps in the courtyard with a smile that she had never seen before. There was no coldness when she was listening to her report. Only then did Zhu Hai realize that she had most likely made a big mistake. She turned her head and looked pitifully at the young master named Su Qi at the foot of the steps. The young man who was almost hit in the face by the broom smiled and walked up the steps. He was not angry. He took the broom from her hand and stepped over the threshold. He glared at Pei Nanwei, who was gloating. "Is it very fun?" Previously, she had lost her status as Princess Jing En. Now, she didn't even have a place in the beauty rankings. Her expression turned cold once more. The servant girl, Zhu Hai, stood timidly behind Su Fengnian, not knowing what to do. The other servant girl stood behind Pei Nanwei. She looked at the young man who was dressed in plain clothes. Like Zhu Hai, she felt that it was inconceivable. Their miss had once casually refused the visit of the prefectural governor in Yanji County. When Sir Hong heard of this, he was furious. He didn't even fart. After waiting for an answer at the courtyard door, he turned and left. Since that was the case, perhaps only the provincial governor of Yuzhou had the qualifications. But where did such a young and high-ranking person come from? He was the eldest son of the administrator and the #1 official in Bailiang's court, Li Hanlin. A prodigal son who had turned over a new leaf was more precious than gold. He had made a name for himself on the border. But wasn't he just a ranger of the crossbow cavalry? Pei Nanwei's expression was full of mockery. She sneered softly, "Zhu Hai Mei Jiao, why haven't you paid your respects to the king of Bailiang who is visiting Yanji County incognito? You should know that you won't get another chance like this if you miss this village. Not everyone can meet the youngest pillar Gua of the Liang dynasty." The two servant girls didn't have time to distinguish between the truth and the lies. They were so frightened that they fell to their knees with a thump. Zhu Hai, the servant girl who had been holding a broom, immediately burst into tears. Su Fengnian said softly, "Get up. Don't listen to your miss nonsense." The servant girls didn't dare get up even if they were beaten to death. They would rather believe that it was true than not. Who would dare joke around with their lives? If it really was that new king of Bailiang who killed without blinking an eye, wouldn't killing these two servant girls be as easy as breathing? Besides, the whole of Bailiang was amazed that the new king of Bailiang was the 6th most powerful person in the world. If he was happy, wouldn't he have his cavalry kill people? If he was unhappy, he would do it himself. Su Fengnian put down the broom and said to Pei Nanwei, "I am now the secretary of Bishan district. I need someone to cook. Do you have any ideas?" Pei Nanwei said resolutely, "No." Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile. He walked over and picked up the girl, then walked towards the courtyard door. Pei Nanwei wanted to see the world in chaos. She screamed, "Someone come! Someone is kidnapping a girl." No one paid attention to her fanning the flames. The two servant girls secretly looked up and saw their miss, who had a cold temperament, screaming like she was possessed. No matter how young they were and how inexperienced they were still girls. They could tell what was going on. They didn't dare to get up and watched as their miss was taken away by the young man who might or might not really be the king of Bailiang. Outside the door, Su Fengnian threw her onto the horse's back and led the horse out of the alley. The spy, Hu Bai, walked through the alley. He glanced at the silent girl on the horse's back. He lowered his head and continued to walk. The word wish rose in her heart, but died in an instant. Su Fengnian turned his head and looked at the back view that could not hide the loneliness. He did not speak. After leading the horse out of the city, he mounted it and sat behind Pei Nan Wei. They galloped all the way back to Bishan County. Soon, everyone in the county knew that the Registrar General had a beautiful wife. It was really a failure in the officialdom. It couldn't stop this Registrar General from being proud of his love life. When the county premier, Zhuo Jing, heard that everyone in the county yamen was talking about this, he couldn't hold back anymore. It was the first time he took the initiative to bring wine to his humble home. It was indeed amazing. However, the woman was wearing a bramble hairpin and a cloth dress. It was really a trap for Su Qi, who had fallen from grace. If it was him, wouldn't he serve her like a female bodhisattva? However, the woman, who looked like she had just become a wife, didn't pay attention to anyone. After arriving at Bishan County, she only dragged Registrar General Su to buy tea, rice, oil, and salt for the first 2 days. She took care of the house in peace. When she met with visitors who had ulterior motives, she only showed her face slightly as the mistress of the small yard. She barely maintained her etiquette and didn't show any friendliness. They could only see her moving the worthless potted plants and feeding the chickens and ducks in the corner. Zhuo Jing was so sly that he played a trick. He intentionally let Registrar General Su Qi handle some unimportant old cases in the county yamen. The woman would also come slowly with a box of food. She would wait for Su Qi to finish the piping hot food before returning with the box. It was so simple, but it was enough to hook the eyes of the people in the county yamen to the ground. They couldn't wait to be stepped on by her. Even County Magistrate Feng Guan, who had always been arrogant, started to chat with Su Qi, his subordinate, punctually at noon. However, when the woman showed up, he would take the initiative to leave. Even County Magistrate Bai Shank didn't try to get close to Su Qi. He just changed his clothes every day. Someone started calling the woman Madame Su. After she nodded and smiled, the title Madame Su gradually spread throughout the county yamen. Obviously, thanks to Madame Su, the Registrar General finally looked like an official. Every 2 or 3 days, people would invite him to drink. Su Qi didn't refuse any of them and would return home reeking of alcohol. This day was the summer solstice. In the twilight, Su Fengnian looked drunk but his eyes were clear. He returned to the courtyard and sat at the table. Even though he had already eaten, he still ate simple dishes with more vegetables than meat at the same table with her. These days it had been like this. During the day, they didn't talk much. At night, they didn't sleep on the same bed. Su Fengnian could be considered to be sleeping on the floor. If news of this spread, it would definitely make people happy. It would make those old men who had lost their souls feel relieved. Su Fengnian sat in the courtyard and enjoyed the shade. Pei Nan Wei cleaned up the dishes and lay on the bamboo bench beside Su Fengnian, gently shaking a reed fan. Pei Nan Wei said, "It's the summer solstice?" Su Fengnian grunted. Pei Nan Wei stopped fanning and asked, "Many people are going to die in Guangling?" Su Fengnian was silent. Pei Nan Wei raised her head and looked at the twilight. She laughed softly and said, "The good people in the history books are all perfect people without any flaws. As for the bad people, it seems that they can't do a single good thing. If you were to die one day, wouldn't there be a single good word about you?" Su Fengnian squatted on the small bench and still didn't say anything. He only took the fan in her hand. He wasn't as stingy as she was. After waving the fan, both of them felt cool. Pei Nan Wei leaned to the side and gazed at him. "Aren't you number 6 in the world? If you can conjure 1 or 2 mu of reeds for me, I'll let you sleep on the bed tonight." Su Fengnian calmly said, "Even if I'm an immortal on Earth, I still don't have this ability. Besides, what's the difference between letting me sleep on the bed and you sleeping on the floor?" Pei Nan Wei held her belly and laughed. Then she winked at him and said, "You're the number 6 in the world for nothing." Su Fengnian laughed. "Who said I wasn't?"